if instead of educating a generation into wanting to annihilate their neighbors, Hamas in power had spent 18 years building up a state, teaching peace, creating coexistence with their neighbors. You think
Do you know how you can tell if someone's got takes in Israel-Palestine? Is the more words they pronounce weirdly. Hamas, Gaza. Like, the more that they do this, the more they are. It's your accent. I'm not talking about your accent. I'm talking about the forced shift. You pronounce Fatah weird. No, I don't.
I think you're the one who's downplaying the influence and impact that we have. We are, after all, when I'm saying we, I'm saying the United States.
He's such a slimy debate lord, this Dave Smith guy. He's always doing this thing where all he talks about is American or Western exceptionalist explanations for everything that goes wrong in the world. And then as soon as someone calls him out and he's like, well, I didn't say that America does everything bad. Why is the UN so cucked? What do you mean? In what way? Like impotent, or what do you mean? I don't know what you mean by that. That could mean so many things. Doesn't this build a stronger case against Israel since they have been consistently using aid as a weapon? Oh yeah, of course it does. Yeah. Seeing what they'll do when they have a blank check obviously reveals, right? Like that might have been the case. Like it could have been the case that even after October 7th, they might have just left aid like strangled off like indefinitely. You know, like they might without. It's quite possible that without the intervention from Biden and from Blinken, then it might have just stayed that way rather than only lasted like 2 or 3 weeks before they started opening aid ports. So I don't know. We'll see now. Give it like less than a month. If they still don't let aid in, it's probably because people in the government want Gazans to just starve en masse. Because they control the net, they control Philadelphia as well. They can't even say that Egypt can bring aid in, can they? If any aid goes in from any part of Gaza, it's Israel has to say yes to it.
There was a two-state solution. It had been achieved.
Well, it was another state, yeah.
Oh, okay, but that would be 2 states then.
No, it was another state. It was different from the PA.
Okay, right, but I'm saying a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's interesting about that is that this is not how any of the leaders really describe it. I mean, when Netanyahu himself is not claiming that they had already achieved a 2-state solution, why are you talking about this? What happened in 2005 in the disengagement was that essentially Israel.
Dave Smith is probably right here, but he's going to go into like the full conspiracy theory with the wise glass quote. But he's probably more correct than Murray here.
From occupying the place to surrounding the place, and they've had it under a brutal blockade since 2007. And yes, you were right that it was.
Why do you? I don't agree. The blockade was brutal by any means.
You don't think the blockade of Gaza?
The 2007-2010 blockade was quite brutal, I would say. After that, and over the years, parts of it got much more relaxed. But 2007 to 10 was quite insane. A depleted Hamas is so low on cash that it can't pay its fighters. Oh yeah, I saw this, yeah. And how are they, like, the fact that there's still like an economy running in there and they're paying soldiers and kind of insane.
It was brutal?
I mean, how brutal do you think the Egyptians are?
Pretty brutal. Yeah.
They allowed stuff in.
Okay, I mean, since some stuff has gotten in, yes, that's true. Since
more than some stuff.
Okay.
More than some stuff.
Okay, I'll say this, right? Because there's been different levels of blockade, even before.
Not even the PA pays their fighters these days. Well, that's because the PA have had their finances by Smotrich, no? Isn't that why the PA are struggling to pay salaries? Because of, ironically, repercussions for October 7th, even though the PA didn't do October 7th?
2007, going back. I know in 1996, they had like a pretty strong blockade that year. According to the World Bank, it contracted 40% of the GDP of Gaza. So just for reference, the Great Depression was a 30% contraction. This was in 1996. For 1 year, they gave them something worse than our Great Depression. That was just 1 year. From 2007 on, there's been a blockade of that country.
That's a very interesting year to choose for that stat, because the thing with, it's really hard to go by Gaza when it comes to GDP, because if you look at GDP in Gaza in particular, maybe even the West Bank in the 90s, but it oscillates just massively. Like it's got huge bumps and then huge dips. And I wonder if it's because of the way that their economy is so dependent on aid imports but I don't know how that would affect the way the GDP works. It would also be to do with connection to how many work permits there are and things like that, because work permits are quite a big thing for GDP in Gaza, or they were. Same with the West Bank.
You don't think that's kept the country poor?
Why do you think there's a blockade of any kind?
Why is there a blockade? Well, I mean, the argument from Israel would be...
No, why do you think?
I would say, okay, I think that the disengagement, I think...
The answer to this is very simple. He just wants to, he just doesn't want to concede it. The answer is because of Hamas importing weapons and firing attacks at Israel, like rockets. And that's why there's blockade.
Otrich was correct when he said that. I'm sorry, my mistake there. I think which another quote that I'm sure you're familiar with, but Dov Weisklav, who was the senior advisor to Sharon, was the prime minister at the time. He essentially said the reason we're doing the disengagement, the reason we're doing this, is so that we can put the peace process in.
See, that's not about the blockade. That's about the withdrawal. We're talking about the blockade. He needs to stick to his story, I guess.
Aldehyde. This is the reason we're doing it.
You're not answering my question. You're
Yes,
continuing to cite.
I'm
He
getting
also
there.
didn't say this is the reason it was done. It said there was an outcome with the formaldehyde. That's what they said. Because it doesn't even, if you try to say that it was done to freeze the peace process, that doesn't really make sense, because Sharon already believed there was no peace process. He believed that there was no negotiating partner in Palestine. Like, it didn't exist. The peace process, as far as Sharon was concerned, was like already non-existent. So the idea that he felt like he needed to freeze it like harder, that doesn't really work. What Sharon wanted to do with the withdrawal, and which is why it was such a bad idea, was that he believed that if they pulled out of Gaza, and even later on he wanted to pull out of like pretty large parts of the West Bank, was that they were afraid of Palestinians eventually demanding voting rights. They were afraid of becoming too intertwined with these areas where they couldn't sustain a Jewish majority, and then one day just like there being a one-state reality that they couldn't get out of, and then that would be like the ultimate threat to the Jewish state. So he thought that if they pulled out, they get to say, well, we're just going to treat this like we treat any other country that attacks us now. Like, it's not our problem. They can do what they want. If they attack us, we're going to fuck them up. That was Sharon's entire logic behind the disengagement. And that's why he also wanted to potentially disengage from pretty large parts of the West Bank as well, and why Olmert was close to doing it, but the rest of the world advised him not to, largely because of how Gaza was going.
Right-wing Israeli politicians. But what do you think is the reason?
I'm getting there. I'm saying, so I think they disengaged in order to kill the peace process. I think they put the full blockade around the country for the reason that they've always kind of done it there, that, yeah, they don't want too much stuff getting in. They want to keep them, as they put it, on a diet, and they don't want rockets to fly into Israel.
I love the ordering of that. Yeah, they don't like it when Gazans like get stuff, and they want to, we're putting Gaza on a diet. And because they don't want rockets flying at them.
The second one is a kind of important one, isn't it? The final
one
you said.
It is.
If the Palestinian leadership in Gaza after 2005 had not from the get-go decided to use Gaza as a stockpiling place for rockets to fire into Israel, all of it would be different. If they had just resisted the temptation that so many of us do in our lives to stop keeping RPGs in our cellars and then Katyusha rockets in our children's bedrooms, all of it could have been different. If that desire to live in peace beside your neighbors had superseded the desire to stockpile rockets, it would all be different.
Yeah, or if Israel just hadn't occupied them for 60 years, it would all be different too. I mean, why is it the onus always on them?
Well, you believe in self-determination, I'm sure. Yes.
I believe in individual rights, yeah, sure.
Okay, individual rights.
The blockade only made life more difficult for Gazans while Hamas was still able to smuggle in weapons. That is, what do you call that, a nirvana fallacy? It's like, just because it didn't block every single weapon doesn't mean it didn't block weapons. I'm sorry. We all know this. Look at Hezbollah. That's with no blockade, right? That's when they have a clear path to get weapons from Iran, you get Hezbollah, which is obviously were a lot more, despite their other flaws and their difficulties, they were a lot more better armed than Hamas, I guess. What would your critique of Murray be? Murray doesn't seem to be willing to... The fact that he thought Gaza was, you could call it a state after 2005 is retarded. Like, even Sharon didn't believe that. Like, Sharon would have literally said, like, no, this is not going to be a state. No, it's going to be an entity that we're going to watch closely from a safe distance. Like, that's what Sharon would have said. It was not to make it a state. Yeah, he also just hates Muslims so much that it makes him completely like rose-colored glasses when it comes to Israel.
And that includes
I don't even know if I've heard him make that much of a critique of Netanyahu. Like, he's very like on board with all of that shit.
Make bad decisions.
Sure.
Yes. The Palestinians in Gaza, when they voted in Hamas, made a very bad decision.
Yeah, of course,
And
Douglas.
in the
but
years,
but,
hang on,
Yes.
hang on. And in the years after that, they made bad decision after bad decision. It was a very bad decision to continually fire thousands of rockets into Israel. It was a very bad decision to use what boats came in early.
There's also a denseness with the assumption that Gaza was just going to be happy with abandoning the West Bank as an occupied zone. Depends on who you're talking to. Sharon didn't really care about whether Gaza would be happy with getting the West Bank abandoned. It's also assuming that the West Bank wasn't necessarily going to be abandoned in that sense, because people forget that as part of the withdrawal from Gaza, Sharon also dismantled 4 settlements in the West Bank and barred people from building on them again. And that bar was lifted by Netanyahu like in 2022 or something. Yeah, but that's why and Olmert, with the convergence plan, the idea was to eventually do the same thing in the West Bank. Obviously, they would have kept a lot of territory along the Green Line and beyond, like Ariel and shit like that. But they also would have done the same thing. They would have evicted a bunch of settlers. It would have probably been a lot more of them. But again, no one's saying that that Gazans needed to be happy with the West Bank remaining the way it was, even if Gaza was evacuated. The question is, what did their leaders do with it? And at the time of the 2006 elections, there were politicians, there was people like along the lines of Salam Fayyad, who were saying that what we can do with the space that we are given is to build ourselves up with what we've got, is to use the aid money that we have, because the world does give Palestinians quite a lot of aid, and to use the freedom of movement that we have, at least within the area that we now have, and without checkpoints within Gaza or anything like that, and to use that opportunity to build up a de facto state reality on the ground that Israel cannot say no to, that they cannot disagree with its existence. And then to put yourself in a position where you can start to maybe make bilateral agreements with neighboring countries, like say like Egypt, and basically showing that, yeah, if you withdraw from here, this is like, we will take care of ourselves. Like rather than turn it into a launch pad like South Lebanon. And those people got 2% of the vote. So shit. But that's a big failure. Objectively, wasn't Gaza built up to be the best it could be? No, absolutely not. Especially after 2014, like there was a total failure for them to rebuild a lot of their damaged infrastructure from that war. Because no, they were putting the money into tunnels and weapons. What are you talking about? Like, if you're going to build 500 kilometers of tunnels, like, yeah, that's a lot of concrete. That's a lot of resources. That's a lot of manpower. A lot of wages. Not to mention all the weapons.
Leon and to use the smuggling networks from Egypt, not to bring in supplies you could actually build a thriving society with, but to bring in rockets. It was a very bad idea. No, there was not starvation in Gaza after 2005. No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There was no deficit?
No, there are
No
plenty
goods were kept out.
There are plenty.
Salam Fayyad majority support. Yeah, timelines are important, Sundowner. Are you trolling me? Trolling me now. In the elections, I believe Fayyad and Hanan Ashrawi, with Third Way, they ran and got 2.4% of the popular vote. Okay. You're talking about 2010, 2011?
How many? Have you been to the crossing point?
Uh-oh.
No.
Have you been?
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? I've never been to. Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you
Well,
can.
right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
Lots
very...
of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so I
if
don't
you're
know
going to
what
spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an ex,
Well, you have to go and touch the ground. To
no,
be
I
able
think
talk
you have
about
to
it?
see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly.
This is a pretty silly argument from Mr. Murray. You spoke about support, not election results. I literally said they got like 2% of the vote when I was talking about post-withdrawal. Fuck you. All right. Yeah. You can still read things and learn about things and still get a good enough insight from not going there. Obviously, going there helps and it's obviously encouraged, but don't just say just because someone hasn't been, especially for Israel-Palestine, because to be honest, you can go top to bottom of Israel-Palestine, but because it's so intertwined, but also in the same way, so segregated that like you can miss so much even if you've been like all over the place. So you can run all the way through Gaza with an IDF escort and get loads of insight on the border crossings, on the aid trucks, on the IDF operations, on the way that the troops are placed, the way maybe you might even hear a gunfight. You might see you'll see a lot of the damage, but you're not going to know what it's like for Palestinians living just like 2 blocks away and trying to survive. You're not going to know that. Like you'll know nothing about that from that position. You won't know what it's like to be in one of the field hospitals, taking care of people who have been wounded or killed. So I would say that is not a particularly great argument.
You spend a career talking about something. Yes. I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there.
Okay.
It's a sort of normal it's a normal thing to do. You're talking about crossing points. And not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay. Again, I think this is a non-argument. I don't understand.
No, it's not a non-argument.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a non-argument if you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, about the provisions going into Gaza or not, if you've never seen any of this going on.
So you're not allowed to speak about things that you've read about. You can only speak about.
You can also read about provisions going in and out of Gaza, because even with COGAT, like, and the data that they put out, like COGAT has meetings. I think, like, I don't know if obviously they don't now because aid's not going in. But when aid was going into Gaza, COGAT and would have these meetings every week, and those meetings would include Egyptians, UN workers, UNRWA workers, to discuss like what had gone in, what was waiting for collection, and all that shit. So. Yeah, there's a lot of people you could have asked about any of that going on. And also the UN was recording data at sometimes. UNRWA was recording some of the data. Yeah, silly.
You've seen with your own eyes.
You can talk about what you want, as you're proving. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit, whilst developing all of these views about it. I mean, now I slightly get an idea of where you're coming from. You've read about this blockade, and so you imagine that that's what it is. I imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp.
Uh-oh.
And you probably think that too. Am I right?
I mean, again, literally a concentration camp. It shares a lot of similarities, I would think.
Wow. Well, as I say, you can't time travel back to the Nazi era.
Let's
but
go
you
back to
could
the
go
blockade.
to the Middle East and actually visit it.
Okay,
It's
the
not hard to
World
do.
Bank said in 1996 for the one
Now
year
the
of the blockade.
libertarians are quoting the World Bank. I love it.
It doesn't mean anything. This is a non-argument.
No.
Yes, I'm saying the World Bank did their own analysis of this.
Why does he keep talking about the World Bank? Do you think Murray would have had a different view or position if Dave Smith had visited the Rafah crossing and took a selfie there? Absolutely not, no. Douglas Murray fucking despises like any Palestinian commentator who talks about things that they've seen, even if they are on the ground. So, because he'll just call them propagandists, right? But he loves this World Bank stat from 1996, eh?
And they said that it was a 40%
do your
of
own analysis.
Hold on. You got to stop interrupting and let him finish this.
The
Fire
World
away.
Bank said that 40% drop in the GDP of 1 year due to the blockade. And there's been a blockade from 2007 on. So are you saying that this hasn't had an economic effect? Is that the argument?
No, of course it'll have an economic effect.
So you're saying you have to be on the ground and do an audit of the blockade in order to be able to comment on
I
it?
think you should at least know what it
Get
is,
him,
what the
Joe.
territory is, what the situation is in the region. Yes, absolutely.
And the only way
Absolutely.
to do that is to be there in person.
I think that's the best way. It's not the only way, but it's the best way, for sure.
Uh-oh.
For sure. If you have never seen the countries in question, you've never spoken to the people in question, you've never interviewed anyone, you've never gone around, you've never seen the terrain, and so on, and you've used Wikipedia, I'm sorry.
I'm on Wikipedia right now. I'm looking at this World Bank stat of 40%. It's from Sarah Roy. This is someone that Finkelstein really likes. So the Wikipedia says the World Bank said 40% losses due to closures on movement of goods starting in 91. Total closure on Gaza for a cumulative 342 days over 3 years. So basically like 1 out of the 3 years. total. Complete ban of movement of people or goods between Gaza and Israel, the West Bank, and foreign markets. Economic impact was estimated by the World Bank as amounting to almost 40% of Gaza's GNP during 1996 alone. I can just find the World Bank, couldn't I? Why would Wiki not have the World Bank? World Bank, Gaza, GNP, 1990. I want to show you one of these charts for Gaza's economy over time because it is very bizarre the way it works. It would be GDP you'd want to go for, not GDP growth annual. It's also quite hard to get Gaza separate from the West Bank. But yeah, it tends to look like this. It tends to look like this, which is very, I still don't really know why. I guess it's just to do with like different decisions on blockade measures. But you can see here, 95, it's growing by 7.1 in the West Bank and Gaza. Contracting, no, still, is that still growing, 1.2? Or is this negative? Then 14, 97. 14, where's 96? 1.2. How is Gaza's minus 40? That's GDP growth. You're talking about 996. Was it compared to 1992? But well, that doesn't even match with this either, does it? This is World Bank. This is starting in 95. Does it go earlier? No. Setbacks of 1996. This is in a UN report from 2019. I feel like it would be an article from the World Bank if they're talking about that. Oh, this is from 1996. Okay, this would be them saying it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. World Bank. Control F40. That is not helping. What about the Gaza? The Gaza. Consequence of border closures that followed the February-March bombings of civilians in Israel, up to 55,000 permit-holding Palestinian workers lost their jobs overnight. In addition, as a consequence of the interruption of merchandise trade and the sudden shortage of materials, another 80,000 jobs were temporarily lost within the West Bank and Gaza by mid-March 1996. Unemployment and severe underemployment soared to 2/3 of the workforce in April, an unprecedented figure. For several days in March, there were shortages of basic foodstuffs in Gaza. Millions of dollars in agricultural exports were lost. An important share of agricultural production rotted away, comprising the capacity of many farmers to repellent for the next crop cycle. Fuck. Real daily wages fell by 22% between 95 and 96. 14% in Gaza. Is this before or after the election results? So it sounds like that year was particularly bad after bombings in Israel. Because these would have been some of the first ones. If these were bombings in Israel, these would have been. 96 was when that was still in its early days. This would have been back when Hamas only had one bomb maker, like one chief bomb maker. Then it goes up 14 after 97. So this is like these oscillations will be in relation to opening and closing of the borders, right? COVID, big drop, increase of 7, 4, -5, 2023, obviously. Up 8.9. Like even for GDP growth, even these spikes are like massive, but they're always like after contractions as well. The recession, which is interesting, the 2007, 2008 crash kind of did fuck all to them. This is also true in, I wonder if this is the same in, because I think in Lebanon, initially the 2007, 2008 crash didn't really do that much to them compared to other countries surrounding them because they were spending so much time and effort rebuilding after the 2006 war. And you kind of just have to keep hiring people and chugging along you have to just keep investing when you're in that situation. Like it's like urgent. I wonder if it's the same with Gaza as well, because this would have been after what Cass led. So the 40% number is alluding to something real, but definitely exaggerated because it's actually across the West Bank and Gaza, it's only 1.2 contraction. Would have been bigger in Gaza, but it doesn't seem like it's any bigger than 14 or 15. Okay.
No, that's not the same thing.
Okay. Well, I've not just used Wikipedia, but didn't you write a big piece when the war in Ukraine first came out titled something like, "I've been to Ukraine and they can win, they can repel the Russians"? So you could go there and still get it wrong, right?
No, I was with the Ukrainian armed forces in 2022 when they were retaking territory from the Russians.
Right, the last time they had any advances, yeah. Right.
I said I can see how they can win, which would be advances like that, yeah.
You said if we just fund them, or if we just arm them, that they can then
I said
repel.
that the Ukrainian army was making great successes, which it was when I was with them in the fall of 22.
Okay, listen, there were lots of people who went to Iraq and said, we'll be greeted as liberators, and it'll be paid for in oil, and democracy will spread through the region. So I don't know, either take on the arguments or don't, but I don't think
but your argument's incorrect.
Oh, okay, fine. Well, then present a counter argument to it. But to just tell me I'm not allowed to talk about something because I'm not an expert.
I'm not saying you're not allowed to talk about it.
Okay, fine. Well, you're not an expert, so you shouldn't talk about it. You
now.
haven't been there. Yeah, I know. But you keep playing this game where it's like the whole opening to this podcast was like the non-experts talking about this is such a problem. Now you're saying because I haven't been there, I can't talk about it. Is there a blockade there that's causing economic devastation or not? According to the World Bank, there is.
First of all, I don't think.
Apparently that 40% number comes from Sarah Roy, not directly from the World Bank, but okay. I mean, maybe somehow they might have had like a much smaller contraction in GDP versus a massive one in GNP, but okay, anyway. Punished Foxo, thanks for the $2 for the €2. Holy crap, Lois. JD Vance killed the Pope. Uh-oh. Monkey Man, that's the 2 Australian. You look straight out of Brokeback Mountain. Okay. R-Man, 916, thanks to the $4.99. Like the stream, we must strengthen the lonely box, and it is fueled by that which costs you nothing. True. It doesn't cost anything to lose money, guys. And I learned that from Benny Johnson. Sans, thanks to the $5. Don't listen to the haters. The jacket is awesome. Who said the jacket was bad? I've been seeing positive jacket comments all fucking day, man. I'm flattered. I'm dying. An ASMR podcast, thanks for the $5. I'm trying to listen to one new album a week. Can you recommend my next one? Any genre or artist, I'm not picky. Should I mention 3 just in case you've listened to any of them already? Whatever the fuck that new one is from, oh my God, can I even remember their name? Magdalena Bay, that new one, that's a good one. I do love Tame Impala Lonerism. That's a banger. That's an older one. Oh, one that you probably haven't heard. Listen to an album called Violent by We Are the City. That is just a band that never really got noticed at all, even though I thought they were fucking banging. That's a really good album as well. It's quite themed. Churro Bandit, thanks for the $9.99. What's the update on the desk? I don't know. It'll come. It might not come. Who knows? Headless Chicken, thanks for the tier 1 sub. Consciousness Inc., thanks for the tier 1 sub. Cool jacket. Hey, what'd I say? Fast and Bulbous, thanks for the $5. I could never be a socialist because they use French words like bourgeoisie. Cook, thanks for the $7.99 Australian. How do you keep a balanced view on IP with such unbalanced historic representation on each side, e.g. Morris versus Pape? Any pro-Palestinian historian recommendations? Yeah, Rashid Khalidi. Still go with him. 1 hour shower, thanks for the $1.99. This guy is actually threatening Ethan here. I can't remember who that was, but it could be any of them. Uber, thanks for the $5. Snark is about to bust out the calipers to see if it's a Zionist skull. Wow. Lawson Harrison, thanks for the $5. Assman's correct. Weight, hair, and fertility are women's 3 favorite things to be mocked for. True. And Baron Zimo XIV, thanks for the £2. I want to see Spider debate Frogan. Good luck, bro. Why do you wreck Rashid Khalidi if he lies? David, find me one Israel-Palestine commentator who doesn't lie or get things wrong. Sorry. Sorry.
I think it's a game. I don't think it's a game at all.
Me neither.
I'm not playing a game. Okay,
but this is semantics.
No, but this is important.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen plenty of this up close. I've seen plenty of this with my own eyes.
You want to see Ethan versus Queeman? Morris, easy. Bro, have you heard Morris with some of the takes that he has on contemporary Israel-Palestine numbers and facts? Like, he gets shit wrong about this stuff all the fucking time. Jesus. As soon as the documents are not accessible, Benny Morris is just fucking all over the shop.
I do believe that one of the things you should do if you're talking about something is to see it.
Yeah, you've established that. Is there a blockade?
The blockade that existed, to the extent it existed, was a blockade to try to make sure that the Israelis and the Egyptians knew what materials were going in and out of Gaza after the first rocket fires when Hamas...
What's Murray's biggest criticism of Israel? I don't think I've ever heard it. I don't know what it would be. Maybe probably the Oslo Accords. Everyone who's like fucking hyper-partisan on both sides always says the Oslo Accords. Like a concession from either... that's the worst thing, right?
In fact, before Hamas was elected, the Israelis and the Egyptians didn't do a very good job of it, were meant to be trying to make sure that the materials that went into Gaza were not materials that could be used to build up the Gaza and Hamas war machine. The reason why trucks get searched is not because the Israelis want to search through grain or flour.
Grain.
It's because they wanted to stop the trucks containing the arms and the munitions that the Gazan Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters
Bring up
were going
cookies,
to use
Dave.
to fire against Israel.
Get him with the cookies.
And I'm sorry, it just makes the most obvious strategic sense. As the late great Joan Rivers once said, if as an appeal to authority.
That one I'll allow. That one I like.
She also said that Michelle Obama's a man.
Yeah, I know she did that.
No, I'm saying she got everything right. So continue. Go ahead.
But
Jesus Christ.
as
man.
Joan Rivers said, if New York was being rocketed from New Jersey, we would level New Jersey. I don't think you need to level it, by the way. But you would at least try to make sure that rockets weren't being imported in larger quantities into New Jersey.
Of course.
Okay, that's all the Israelis were doing.
And they haven't turned
All
away
that
any
they were
food or
doing.
aid. They haven't
No.
They haven't said you can't bring potato chips in, or you can't have
Hey,
cookies because they
uh-oh.
have dual use.
No,
Isn't this their whole argument that
No.
there's anything that could be used to build a
Oh
rocket?
shit, he's jabbing at Destiny there. He's definitely jabbing at Destiny for saying cookies having dual use. Uh-oh. Dave.
Rocket has to be excluded.
Anything that could be used to build a rocket. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's a good reason, again, not to build rockets and fire them at your neighbors. It's almost
Yeah, I
like there's
agree.
a cost to play. It's almost like there's a cost to pay for instead of
Just because we might have some newcomers and some old comers have gone. I guess they're old goers, I guess. The reason that things like cookies and potato chips and shaving foam and all this other shit, pasta, was initially banned in 2007 was because there's kind of like two versions of the story. I honestly think they're not incompatible. They're probably both true to some degree. Is that they wanted to put pressure on Hamas, so they blocked everything. Like it was a blanket block on everything, and then what they introduced was they made like a white list of goods with trusted suppliers that were allowed to go in. So the white list was basically just about enough to make sure that everyone was getting just maybe a bit over their daily recommended calories a day, and that was it. Anything else that came from a supplier that was outside the white list or any item that was outside the white list was just off. So that would obviously include a bunch of things that appeared like arbitrary bans, like cookies and crisps and everything else. But that's because they weren't on the white list. And one of the reasons was that someone said that they were reintroducing things one at a time as they could develop like make sure there was a proper like trusted supply route and someone they could trust on the receiving end to get it, and so that no particular supplier or company could be used as a smuggling route. So eventually maybe in 2008-9, like things like pasta or like little bits started to go in one at a time. Cookies, I believe, were they were allowed, but they were only allowed to certain suppliers, to certain recipients. I think it was international organizations could take them. Sugar wasn't banned, so it wasn't to do with rockets. Yeah, pasta was briefly allowed in because John Kerry made a fucking spiel about the blockade. Another reason that they were reintroducing things to this white list incredibly fucking slowly was because, and this was admitted to by Israeli ministers behind the scenes, was that they didn't like the idea of the people who had kidnapped Gilad Shalit eating like sweets, basically. So it was partially to do with punitive action and to pressure Hamas and to punish the population for voting for Hamas, and also like it was like the process of like exploiting that slow process of reintroduction to the white list. And then after 2010, with the flotilla incident and the blockade being thrown into the spotlight, that whitelisting system kind of gradually fell apart, and then it just became a dual-use list, a fully banned list, and then everything else was allowed in, provided like the appropriate channels were used. Dual use is not just any fucking material. The list of dual use items was derivative from an agreement that actually lots of countries agree on, called the 1996 Wassenaar Agreement. That's where that comes from. Wassenaar Agreement on export controls, for conventional arms and dual use goods and technologies. It does seem like some of this stuff is arbitrary and dumb. You could argue that what they chose to go on the whitelist was arbitrary. Like there were probably going to be a lot of things that could have gone onto the whitelist earlier that weren't. Like that's obviously the case. We know that because as soon as the flotilla incident happened, things started getting reintroduced to the acceptable list immediately, like very, very quickly, much more quickly than before. Which means they would have had suppliers that they were like, yeah, we can trust the supplier. We're okay with this good coming in. We're just going to wait a bit. We're just going to do paperwork and shit because they wanted to use the economic pressure and the social pressure of the blockade to hopefully undermine Hamas. Obviously, it failed because it was retarded fucking policy. Collective punishment doesn't work. But yeah, that's the gist of the blockade. That's what they're talking about here.
Living in peace with your neighbor, constantly trying to wipe them out. And that is what Hamas did for 18 years. 18 years. This is why I think it's so unbelievable taking agency away from the...
Not to be one of them, but sugar is regularly used in crude rocketry. Yeah, we know, but sugar wasn't banned. So sugar wasn't banned, you fucking idiot. Like, why would they ban sugar products but not sugar itself? Oh, it might be because they weren't immediately concerned about all the sugar getting used for rockets. Anyway.
Palestinians of Gaza is that the Hamas had 18 years, and 18 years is obviously the time from the birth of a child to the end of their formal education. They literally had the opportunity to create a generation in Gaza that wanted to live beside their Israeli neighbors. And from everything I've seen since the 7th of October in the region, and from all of the dead and the survivors and the family members I've seen, so many of them, particularly the people in the south who were attacked on the morning of the 7th, were literally people who dreamed of living in peace with their Palestinian neighbors. They were people like Vivian Silva, whose body wasn't identified for months because there wasn't enough of her charred remains left to even extract DNA from. She spent every weekend, like so many people in the communities in the south of Israel, every weekend driving children with the most rare medical conditions.
The sugar rocket thing always makes me lol. There are videos of people doing it, isn't there? Isn't there like a Syrian dude making a rocket out of sugar and fertilizer? Is this illegal? Syria's rocket man.
With the precision of a master chef, Sheikh Omar adjusts the flame.
Let him go.
In the pan, table sugar and a chemical compound bought locally that we've agreed not to name.
Ooh.
It's almost ready, he says, as the color darkens. Sheikh Omar, who doesn't want his face shown, has decades of experience in the art of war. He says he fought with the Palestinians and was detained twice by the Israelis in the 1980s.
Isn't it salt, Peter? Are you asking what the other component is? I know that for the Qassam rockets, it was sugar and potassium nitrate, which is fertilizer.
But they had more mercy than the Assad regime, adds bitterly. Now he's using his training in weapons design that he got in Libya.
This amount, combined with another substance, is what he uses to make a single grenade. When it comes to making the propellants for a rocket, it's around 20 times this amount, and 2 more substances are included.
Sheikh Omar now works alone after his assistant was killed while they were experimenting.
Look at it, man.
He's designed crude but effective grenades, and his biggest accomplishment, a sleek-looking rocket which he claims has a range of 12 kilometers.
Much of what Sheikh Omar uses comes from unexploded ordnance like this fired by...
Man, these journalists must just have such a bomb, right? They must just be going down here, like, having the time of their life, sitting with a guy who makes rockets out of sugar. Oh, God.
Forces, and clearly marked on this rocket, made in Russia.
When he first started, Sheikh Omar tells us he would modify unexploded rockets. From here to here, for example, it's our adjustment, as are the fins, he says. We'd shoot one and it would just go 3 kilometers, or it would turn back around in our direction. Now he designs from scratch, mixing a substance he won't reveal, but that is imported from outside with the explosive he extracts from the government's artillery. He may be the master bomb maker, but Sheikh Omar says he's a man of peace. He wants to see a democratic Syria that reflects this nation's rich diversity. And he believes
I hope he's still
that
kicking
after
around.
the Assad regime falls, there will be another revolution to purge this one of extremists and opportunists. Arwa Damon, CNN, Aleppo province.
Couldn't be treated in one of the Hamas-run hospitals in Gaza into very specialist, couldn't be drugged every weekend, like so many people in the communities in the south of Israel, every weekend, driving children with the most rare medical conditions that couldn't be treated in one of the Hamas-run hospitals in Gaza into very specialist units inside Israel. And she spent every weekend doing that and working with B'Tselem and all of these radical left Israeli groups. And it didn't matter a bit when Hamas came in because they burnt her in her own home anyway. My point is, in all of the counterfactuals of this conflict, the most important one is what could have happened if instead of educating a generation into wanting to annihilate their neighbors, Hamas in power had spent 18 years building up a state, teaching peace, creating coexistence with their neighbors. You think
Do you know how you can tell if someone's got shit takes in Israel-Palestine? Is the more words they pronounce weirdly. Hamas, Gaza. Like, the more that they do this shit, the more fucked they are.
Any of the people on the kibbutzim in the south or the young people dancing at the Nova party weren't dreaming of the day that the Palestinian government in Gaza would have created those conditions for them to live beside as well. Of course.
It's your accent. I'm not talking about your fucking accent. I'm talking about the forced fucking shift. You pronounce Fatah weird. No, I don't. No, I don't.
I don't think anybody's arguing.
Yeah, no, right.
Everybody argues against
nobody's arguing.
I should call it Fatah. That just sounds like an American, though. Fatah.
Douglas, it's just,
no,
again,
I mean
it's,
here.
I mean, it's not what I'm saying. Look, I'll say this again, because you bring up the point about agency again. And I hear this a lot as a counter, much like I said in
the way you said Gaza is the Arab pronunciation, not with the, not with that. It's not that. That's not the letter, is it? I only hear Westerners say it with that. Okay, whatever.
Ukraine, it's not denying anybody agency. I'm not saying that. Believe me, if I was in control of how people acted, I would certainly. There are.
It's not who. You were pretty accurate. Okay, listen, I'm sorry. I can't help it. I can't help it that my fucking Lebanese blood is getting the better of me and forcing me to say words properly when I'm trying to imitate someone saying it badly, okay? I can't help it, okay?
Palestinians could have handled things much better, and there are different points where we probably all would agree that we wish they had done it this way and not this way.
Too authentic.
And I think that embracing, for those Palestinians who embrace terrorism...
Yes, too hinged is right. It's not a cha. It's a I'm not going to say it. It's a letter that shouldn't really exist. What is this? Improvise. Fucking hell, bro. Is this legal? Why are you sending me this? Jesus.
Which which pretty early on, I mean, Israel and Palestine have been at war since the existence of Israel, really. And I know it's convenient to kind of pretend October 7th was like the first thing, but actually there's a long history here. I'm not denying any of them agency. The problem is that I see it as like you only seem to focus on the agency of one side. And then, if you want to talk about counterfactuals, I think the most interesting counterfactual, well, maybe I'll give you two. Number one, would be Chaim Weizmann, who was essentially supposed to be the David Ben-Gurion. Like, he was in line as like the #1 ranking Zionist. This is pre the creation of the State of Israel, who urged all of the Zionist militias to not embrace terrorism. And he ended up losing that battle ultimately. In many ways, this is how terrorism was introduced.
He was the first president of the state.
David Ben-Gurion was. I was saying Chaim Weizmann. Yeah,
Weizmann was the president. Ben-Gurion was the prime minister. Even though the president is just like a ceremonial role, it doesn't really do that much.
Yes. And he basically ended up...
What does it mean he lost the fight against embracing terrorism? What does he mean by that? I'm pretty sure the Haganah fought pretty fucking aggressively against the people that they considered terrorists in the movement, like the Irgun and they fought with them. They shot them and shit. They hunted them down.
Losing his position to David Ben-Gurion because they just wanted to be more hardcore. And by the way, the Irgun and the Lehi and the Haganah, they openly embraced terrorism to drive out an occupying force.
See, that's just such a fucking brain dead retelling of the story. No, the Irgun and the Lehi were the terrorists. We're talking about by the way that they saw it at the time. Yeah, the Lehi and the Irgun were the terrorists, and the Haganah opposed them and hunted them down. And during the 48 war, but the fucking Irgun got one of their boats sank by Ben-Gurion.
This is literally the story of the creation of the State of Israel. The Palestinians fell into a terrible, tragic mistake early on. And I'm saying, listen, I reject terrorism as we all should, just because killing innocent people is wrong. I'd like to get to that a little bit more in a second, because it's interesting that we haven't really gotten into what I think is a great humanitarian crisis here. But they were following, I think in some ways they were very influenced by the Algerian model, that they were like, hey,
That's
look,
true.
we could embrace, listen, there's a lot of groups, whether it's...
Which Algerian model?
Well,
FLN.
driving the French out.
So the first Algerian war.
Yes.
Or the second.
But look, I mean, there's a lot of these scenarios where we look back at Nelson Mandela, for example. You know, Nelson Mandela was not imprisoned because he was, making picket signs. I mean, there have been people who have embraced violence as a means to achieve a policy end, including the early Zionist settlers, including the Israeli
This guy
government.
is just fucking flailing now. Why would you go from like they use the methods of the FLN and then talk about Mandela and then it just feels like it's the post-it note thing again. It's the post-it note fucking politics. The approach of Mandela and the approach of the FLN were insanely fucking different, right? Like, for better or worse, the FLN methods were basically just like what Mandela would have probably described as terrorism. Like they were, because they bombed in fucking cafes, they attacked like civilians and shit like that. And then the whole point of it was, like we're going to make the cost of colonialism higher than the gain. And it worked. And obviously the French, in their response to the FLN, did a million times worse. They dropped fucking napalm on them and shit. But that's not, I wouldn't liken the ANC to fucking the FLNs.
Including the U.S. government and lots of governments around the world. The tragic, tragic mistake in terms of political outcome from the Palestinians is that they really just underestimated the fact that these Jews had no home to go to. This was their home. And you could drive out the French from Algeria because they go, screw it, we're going back home to France. The Jews had been so persecuted in Eastern Europe that there was...
Shit, has he been watching my video? That's what I say. What the fuck?
No home to go. And of course, then after World War II, they were here to stay. And so, of course, it's been a tragedy. And of course, a lot of Palestinian actions I wish would be different. I wish Hamas didn't exist. It should be pointed out, by the way, that in 2005, you did mention that it was really part of the Bush administration's exporting democracy around the world that put pressure on them to have these elections. It should also be mentioned that Hamas did not win a majority in one single precinct. They won pluralities all around. So just saying, when we're bringing up this election, half the population of Gaza today is under the age of 18. They were toddlers if they were alive in 2005. Of the other half, that maybe half of them voted in these elections, it was never a majority that supported Hamas. They eked out a victory. And then, of course, there was an attempted coup after that, and that's when Hamas seized complete control. The coup failed. Regardless of any of that.
You know, everything that Dave Smith said there was actually correct. I think it was probably a reasonable telling of the story.
I agree with you that, the Palestinians have agency, and I wish some of them had made better decisions. Now, many of them have made better decisions, and it's still resulted in nothing better happening for them and their people. And so I do find it kind of hard to, lecture a group of people who are going through so much. Like, the level of human suffering that's being inflicted on the people of Gaza right now cannot be overstated. And so, to lecture them about how you're supposed to handle that exactly. But I will say, man, I think there's kind of this selective empathy that you have here. I agree with you. Talking about these teenagers being slaughtered at a music festival on October 7th. It's like, God, I have little kids. I can't, imagine the nightmare of this happening to somebody's children. But at the same time, we're not having this conversation on October 9th or in November or December of 2023. We're having it in 2025, where the tragedy that's been inflicted on Gaza is orders of magnitudes greater than October 7th. There are just every day people are inundated with images of just dead women and children. This is one of the most brutal wars. And by several metrics that really, personally matter to me, like the number of dead kids, I think that's a pretty good one. It's more children have died than in any recent war. I mean, this is it does, I do think there's almost a fundamental framing bias that you get into when people have these debates, and I've had several of them, as you have also. But it seems to me that there's almost an implicit difference in the value that you place on Israeli life versus the value that we place on Palestinians' life. And to even we've gone this far into the conversation and haven't even talked about the fact that Israel has, feel however you feel. If you want to argue, I haven't been there, stuff does get through the blockade. Okay, fine. This is a captive people, you know, that Israel has dominated since at least 1967. Many of them are there because of the creation of the state of Israel, who used to live in what is now called Israel. And they are just, I mean,
or the recent conflict to Yemen and Syria. Yeah, it's
the amount of human suffering that's being inflicted on them, when, even as you kind of acknowledged with the George W. Bush exporting democracy, Hamas in many ways was forced on these people. In fact, we saw protests against Hamas just recently.
Hey.
So I don't know. I mean, that to me seems to be the greatest human tragedy. And I think much more so.
I love it. The anti-Hamas. Listen, if you acknowledge the anti-Hamas protests, you're probably okay. That's my litmus test now. Probably not the end of the world if you acknowledge that those guys exist. Because fuck me.
Then you can characterize it as people being pro-Hamas or people being anti-Semitic, but I actually think that the mass movement around the world of people who oppose this war has been that people feel really awful about all these babies and who are being slaughtered.
Okay, quite a few things. First of all, let's just get one term correct, because you said you do think it's a concentration camp.
I said it shares many, you know.
Right. And you also say that there's
Jesus.
a disproportionately heavy youth population in Gaza.
Yes. Do you think that's not accurate?
I think the second one is accurate.
Right.
But it's a very strange thing to say that there's a population boom in a concentration camp. In Auschwitz in the 1940s, there was not a doubling of the population.
Yeah, well, I didn't say it was.
He didn't say
it
it's
was
a
death
concentration camp. He said it shares many of the characteristics.
Auschwitz was a concentration camp. Birkenau was the death camp.
Auschwitz was a concentration camp.
It was ultimately a death camp, no?
Yes, it started as a concentration camp.
Yes, correct.
You'll notice that people were not doubling in size their number because of the children they could have in Auschwitz.
Yeah, but nobody's
So,
nobody's
hang on.
calling it a
You can't-
concentration
you-
camp because it's the
You're
same
saying-
as Auschwitz.
Okay,
I don't
but
know.
let's just at least tidy up the language.
Or Dachau or Majdanek or Ravensbrück or fucking, I have to remember my names on, they're having babies, therefore no suffering. Well, what the fuck? Okay, I think Embleman's got too much of a hate boner for Douglas Murray. He's saying they're having babies in a population boom, therefore not concentration camp, not therefore no suffering. Holy shit. The hate boner's strong.
Language a bit. Either you think the place is a concentration camp, or you think it's not a concentration camp, and I don't think it can be a concentration camp, or any such term is suitable when you're talking about a place which you yourself have admitted has a disproportionately young population. So that's the first thing.
I don't think
thing
breeding in any way argues against, but okay. I didn't call it a concentration camp. You
well,
did.
you said it has many of the same.
But you asked him if it did.
Yes.
You asked him if it had any of the characteristics of a concentration
Yes,
camp.
because he said earlier that it did.
Okay, well, all
Long
I'm saying.
before
Okay,
that,
so let me be.
that's-
Sorry for not liking the guy. I'm not asking you to, okay, you're being toxic. What the fuck? I'm going to come back to that later. Jesus Christ. What did I say? You have to like someone to fairly characterize what they're saying? You have to like someone to, what kind of fucking attitude is that? That's mental. I don't like him, but I know that when he's saying it's not a concentration camp, that doesn't mean he's saying it's fine. Like, what the fuck? I don't like Dave. But I was happy to listen to him talking for like 2 or 3 minutes about the history and like understanding and acknowledging that he was actually quite correct about quite a few of what he said there. Jesus. What's going on?
Be
Fair,
much
long
more
before
precise.
that.
Let me be much more precise, okay? So I'm not claiming that it is a concentration camp or that it is akin to Auschwitz. I'm saying that it's been under full blockade since 2007. Israel rules the seas, the airs, they control electricity that goes in. They're not allowed to have an airport, they're not allowed to have a seaport. They don't have the freedom to leave without permission from the Israeli government. They don't have the freedom to trade with the world. They don't have a freedom to vote over the government that rules them. I don't know.
If Dave Smith would just have a much more effective line here if he was just like, okay, it's more of a prison than a camp. You can't leave. That's it. That's absolutely what he means by it, though. No, it's not. He literally said that, like, he even bought Dave Smith's point on the 40% GDP contraction and said, yeah, it is bad, but it's because they're firing rockets. That's what he said. I don't know. I'm not engaging. That's just, you're on something else. Your hate boner is getting the better of your better judgment. I don't need to get involved with that right now. Hello, Sundowner.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I may or may have not been listening the whole time. But what I can think about is I heard some discourse about concentration camps.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the argument here? That there are relatively high birth rates and a relatively young population. As such, it inherently cannot be plausibly a concentration camp.
I imagine that would be one of the arguments. If there is a camp where people were giving birth, then you would jump to something else. But I think usually populations don't boom in population and concentration camps. Yeah, usually.
I mean, like, I will be honest here. I do not believe it was a concentration camp, and I don't believe it is now. I believe it's worse now than a standard, like, blank concentration camp without any additional caveats. But, like, if a concentration camp was working properly as it was intended, you would expect a population boom. That's the entire point of concentration camp, to make the civilian population avoid cases of hostility, to drive them away from it. And if it was functioning properly as it was intended, I think that should be the outcome.
If a concentration camp is functioning as intended, there would be population growth. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not talking about a labor camp or a death camp. I'm talking about a concentration camp in its inherent, like, definition. Like, you know how in the Boer War it was formulated to separate the population from the fighters?
Yeah.
Like, it was implemented in a way that led to shit ton of casualties, but it was, like, properly implemented. Yes, it could have degraded the civilian death toll by a great metric.
It's weird that you can
actually make the argument. You can actually make the argument that in the Boer War itself, had the British not implemented concentration camps and instead initiated the war over the population itself, it would have led to a much higher death rate.
I maybe agree with that second one because of the non-combatants. But if we're talking about concentration camps, it's weird when you're in a position where their stated intent is like, their stated intent usually, because back in the day, people used to use concentration camp like an okay phrase. It was acceptable to just say we're doing a concentration camp. But it's interesting that it would be like its intent would be for a population to increase, even though in basically every concentration camp, populations either are stagnant or decrease. Because obviously in the Boer camps, death rates were what, like a quarter, a third? Like,
yeah, I'm not saying that, but my point is that if the camp was working properly as intended and, like, it just did its job perfectly, that is separating the population from the combatants, you would expect that the population would receive sufficient nutrients. It would be receiving sufficient healthcare and stuff, and also it would be separated from combat action. As such, you would expect that the birth rates would be actually increasing if it was working perfectly. So the argument that there is an increase in birth rate in the system that it was entirely implemented to separate civilians from combat just sounds retarded to me.
Yeah, but the problem is you're assuming that the only function of the camps, even stated, was to, say, get the Boer civilians out of the combat areas.
I'm not saying that was what I'm assuming. It was to separate the combatants themselves primarily from their base of support.
But it was also... Yeah, but that's not the only reason, right? Like, because it's like they're doing that, and I believe in the Boer War they did it because guerrillas were using the farms and moving between them. So the solution from Kitchener was to burn down the farms. So they burn down the farms and then they take the civilians and put them into camps. And then obviously that's intertwined with a general, like if it's a concentration camp, that's usually intertwined with a general total disregard for the well-being of them, or maybe even using their plight as bargaining power against the fighters, and then using those internment camps to basically it's no surprise then that them functioning like perfectly, as you say, even though in most cases they actually function in a way that does get the people in them killed, because more part of the purpose of it is like it's out of punishment and punitive measures and hatred and all that shit.
But well, to be fair, almost every case was before the 1950s, and for the 1950s, I don't believe there was anywhere where there was particular regard for human life. So that's why I'm saying that maybe, and I'm not certain about this, maybe someone who knows the military history of those regions better can actually give a better answer. But maybe if concentration camps were not used in Libya or in South Africa, for example, there could have been a higher death toll than the one that we saw. Like, if there was no concentration camps and they just burnt down the farms in South Africa, with everyone in there and just went on a rampage, maybe they would have received a huge fucking death toll that was much higher than the one that we actually received.
Yeah, they would have had to
Maybe
just roam free in the wild and die. Yeah.
Yeah, so like, the fact that that the death rates increase, I don't believe it's an argument against concentration camps, even though I do not believe in this specific instance that concentration camp is a definition that applies.
Yeah, I understand.
Like, you know me, I'm fully in favor of humanitarian concentration camps at this point. I believe it's a very viable and a very much required solution, but that's just not it.
Yeah, but that's because you're calling you've used concentration camps like basically synonymous with like refugee camps or DP camps, right?
No, that's an entire different thing. A concentration camp is supposed to be compulsory. Movement is restricted, and it's an area controlled by the opposing military. And because the IDF would never allow an actual refugee camp, then concentration camp seems like something they might actually be fine with, and under proper supervision, I believe it can actually be something temporarily viable.
Wait.
That's my point.
So the IDF wouldn't do a refugee camp. Well, obviously they haven't. But they would be okay with a concentration camp. But who's doing the forcing into the concentration camp?
Well, I think we already all know that. Like, buddy, if you think that telling everyone to go to a fucking random salt beach with a couple of trucks that come down there every week is a more humane solution than putting people in a camp where they can actually receive proper humanitarian aid and healthcare without getting bombed every 5 seconds, then I don't know what to say. I just believe that this solution, even if it was a very shitty one and there can be better ones, something that could actually work, and it would be a much better improvement.
So what do you mean? What are you saying? Force then? Are you saying are you suggesting the IDF should force Gazan civilians into what you call a concentration camp? Okay.
Probably it would be them. Probably, most likely it would be them. But I would prefer it if it was someone else.
Yeah, but why force them?
Why they won't allow someone.
Yeah, if it's someone else, why wouldn't it just be a refugee camp, though? Would you force people into one of these places, or would it not just be a refugee camp where they can go there if they want to, as long as they've got safe passage?
I would love that, but we both know it's not going to happen.
Yeah, but a concentration camp's not going to happen either. So why would you choose the one that's worse than the refugee camp, the one that's not voluntary?
Well, because it's actually something more viable, and I feel like the concerns that the IDF might have, or the government population might have against a refugee camp, is addressed by the concept of a concentration camp.
Okay. Do you have any
Does that make sense, or I'm just being too much of a schizo here?
Yeah. I don't know why you wouldn't just have a refugee camp that people can choose to go to, because I
would love to.
Viable.
I'm not saying I wouldn't.
Yeah, but I don't know why. Like you got two scenarios here. But you got two scenarios here. You got two humanitarian camps. One people are allowed to go into willingly, and the other one people are forced to go into it. I don't know why you wouldn't have the one where people go there willingly.
No, I would love to have that one, but we all know that's not going to happen. The one that's most likely to happen, the one which has severe military restrictions and control, and nobody can move in and out, and the people who can move in are restricted and controlled. And you know that people we are talking about here are the same people who love that shit, and they will.
So you want that? Yeah, so you want the? So you're saying that you want the IDF to just like to round up a bunch of, because this is something that they actually might like to do, is to round up a bunch of Gazan civilians and put them into a camp, and just hope that that camp is like humanitarian and they get enough aid.
Look. At this point, they have my fucking blessing if it actually was a humanitarian camp and it had proper supervision, and it wasn't just some fucking shit show that we all know many would love to have. Or if it was some sort of a temporary encampment that was implemented by some international body with supervision of the IDF itself.
Okay.
Like, I'm talking about it as a concept. I did not have some find out tune details. I think that it can actually be viable and it can actually happen. I would support it happening under ideal circumstances, under proper living conditions and international supervision. But at this point, I'm honestly out of ideas. Like, what else can be done.
Sometimes you need to get creative, eh?
Yeah. Sometimes you get so fucking black-pilled, you start advocating for concentration camps of your entire population.
Listen,
Yeah.
I hope you feel better. Good luck.
Okay.
I
See
love
you
you.
later.
Bye-bye. Oh, fuck. Okay, quite sad. I'm laughing in a very mixed emotions kind of way. Okay, Charlie, goddamn, thanks for the $50 for the super chat goal. Keep being awesome, Lonerbox. Well, I'll try my best, you know? Hot damn, try my best out here. It's rough. Is Scotland a concentration camp? Yeah.
Call it whatever you want to. That's the situation.
All of which is a result of the election of Hamas.
None of it's Israel's fault.
Jesus
Israel's
Christ.
not responsible for one of the babies that have died, of the bombs that they're dropping.
Let's get onto that. Then, because you say it's one of the most brutal wars. It's a very brutal war. It's a very
No, not war debates. Fuck the debates. Hang on. Can they debate camps more? 1 second. Share how you'll celebrate the new goal. No camp.
very brutal war. It's certainly not even, sadly, among the standards of our time, by any means, the most brutal. We don't need to get into the rather statistician, ugly debate about whether or not you follow the Hamas government in Gaza's figures for the death counts, which most of the world's media rely on, and which I don't think are reliable to the least extent. But you don't need to rely on that to say that, even by the standards of a conflict in neighboring Syria, the highest Hamas death count inside Gaza for the appalling last year and a half is less than an average year has been for the last decade in Syria during the civil war. So
the whole I mean, total far more people died in Syria. I'm not arguing that,
right.
But you're saying it's less than any year? I think there were years that were pretty...
600,000 to 800,000 people have been killed in Syria during the civil war there. And I give it as an example. Far too many examples of wars in the region and in the wider world to go to. But I think we get once again back to the issue of language on this. It's one of the most brutal wars.
That is BS. Can we fact check him? What did he even say? Did he say 600,000 people died in Syria, or did he say something fucking silly? I don't know. Charlie, thanks for $5. It's even more. What the fuck? New goal, let's go, lads. True. He said 800. That's more than I've ever seen. Yeah.
Really obvious that it's an appalling
I've seen
war,
600,000.
but it is not by any numerical or other standards the most appalling war of our time.
600,000.
It's a war that Hamas started because they shouldn't have invaded their neighbor and they shouldn't have tried to genocide their neighbor. Now, if the war can be prosecuted, could be prosecuted, it was always for two reasons. Always for two reasons. The first one, as stated by...
did he suggest that the annual death rate was worse in Syria as well? That's not true either, because the deaths in Syria were concentrated usually into the earlier years, right? It's not like every year was even for deaths. Yeah, that's not true. The average year in Syria was not worse than the mass numbers. The Syrian death toll took place in 14 years. And it was spread, concentrated in some particular years, like 2012, 13, 14.
Unanimity of Israeli politicians and others was to retrieve the hostages, who we also haven't spoken about, but there are still hostages in Gaza held for the last 18 months by Hamas, including young Eden Alexander from New Jersey. If Hamas had not stolen the hostages and hidden them in their tunnels and hidden them in civilian homes, this war would have all been different. If they had have given them back, give them back tomorrow, it would all be different. But they didn't. They decided.
Well, it wouldn't just be about giving the hostages back. It's also about disarming Hamas and getting them out of power. It's not just give the hostages back. Okay, that's not, and even Netanyahu wouldn't say that. When people say release the hostages, just release the hostages. That's not only half the story. Hamas also has to surrender and leave. You know, it's kind of
to do what they did on the 7th and to hold on the 250 odd hostages as it was at the beginning, from the beginning. The second reason why the war is still being prosecuted is because of the stated aim to destroy Hamas, which is the stated aim of the Israelis.
So it's contradicting what you just said
of these
fucking
things
2 minutes
is
ago.
remotely easy. Okay? And just from a point of humility, I think, on everyone's side, we should concede none of that is easy. It is not easy to get 250 hostages back when they have been distributed across the Gaza to civilian homes, hidden in tunnels, surrounded by munitions and much more. Hamas is not an actor like Denmark. Its backers don't behave the way that our governments do in the West. They have a totally different time scale that they think along. They have a totally different scale of values as well. The taunts of Hezbollah's leadership, of Hamas's leadership, of their backers in Tehran are annihilationist to their core. But at any point in the last 18 months, the Qataris, for instance, or the Iranian Revolutionary Government, or Turkish government or others, could have put their pressure on Hamas to return the hostages who are still being held in captivity, and everything would be different. Secondly, as you know, I'm sure, you don't have to have seen this with your own eyes to know it. As I'm sure you know, the way in which Hamas built up the structure of the Gaza throughout the 18 years that they had was precisely to flout and use every law of war against the Israelis. Every army in a conflict has certain rules of war that you're meant to abide by. One of the most obvious is that you are identified as being a combatant, not as a civilian. Okay? Another is you don't put weapons in civilian houses and civilian buildings. You do not fire from houses of worship rockets. You do not launch attacks from hospitals. You do not keep detention facilities where you can torture and disappear people inside hospitals and other medical facilities.
Oh, he read the Amnesty International report on that one. Oh.
All of these laws of war are the laws that Hamas breaks every minute of every day by their actions. So if you want to get the hostages back, and if you want to destroy Hamas, when you're fighting against a force which does not only not follow the rules, but uses your following of the rules of the laws of war against you, at least concede this is a highly specific and complex military operation. And if you have, or anyone else has, and I say this genuinely, a better way to get back the hostages and to destroy Hamas, I, at any rate, am all ears.
Okay. Well, there's a lot there. So number one, like I do agree generally with your point about having some humility in these complex situations. But I would also say, like, do you not then at any point, as you're like a very well-known public figure who's supporting this war, think about the level of human suffering that is being inflicted on these?
I can't mute the mic because the mic and the desktop audio are coming through the same channel for some reason. I don't know why. OBS is being fucking weird. But
innocent people and go like, man, is there another way? Maybe I'm getting this wrong. Maybe this is the Iraq war all over again, you know, which you also supported, that like maybe that was a big mistake.
If I say it, I don't need to think about it. I've seen it.
Okay,
I
fine.
know
Okay.
it. I describe it in my book.
Okay.
I describe what I see in Gaza with the Palestinians when they're moving down the humanitarian corridor.
Okay, let me just respond to some of the stuff you say. Okay, so then I guess not really that much of humility involved in this, but there's two very different goals that are being stated here, right? Like there's the retrieving the hostages and then there's taking out Hamas. Now, the retrieving the hostages, and actually many of the families of hostages who are taken have been some of the only people really protesting this war in Israel, because of course, you know, if you imagine, if you have your family over there and your government is leveling
Can you actually
this.
hear me fucking chewing? I don't even know if there's like a quick mute button on the mic. Fuck. There really should be. You can't.
Place. That is not the best path to pursue to make sure you get all the hostages out alive. I would say that it fell apart, but Donald Trump having his envoy Witkoff go over there and work out this ceasefire deal that they had for a few weeks. They did get, I believe, 30 hostages back during the phase one of this ceasefire. Seems to me like that would be the method to pursue to try to get the hostages back. But if you're talking about eliminating Hamas, And I think there's something kind of interesting that you touched on there. I don't I disagree with much of your characterization of it, that like Israel are the good guys who always follow the rules. We could kind of get into some of that. There's lots of rules like in that Israel does not follow. That being said, yes, of course. I mean, you're describing guerrilla warfare, terrorist organizations. That's right. It stated differently, Gaza doesn't have an air force or an army or a navy. They're just basically militias running around, terrorists who are trying to do everything they can to fight an asymmetrical war. And just like we helped teach Osama bin Laden how to do the Soviets, and then Osama bin Laden successfully did to us, the whole game in these asymmetrical wars is to get...
The way that you summarize like an asymmetrical war, he's a bit understating just how much Hamas were able to achieve militarily in building Gaza into what it was. Like, booby trapping what seems to be like almost every other building, even Sinwar with his fucking... It's funny that like a lot of what I'm about to say about Gaza is actually like Hamas and the IDF both agree on, is that like having 500 kilometers of tunnels in an area that small, 400 or 500 kilometers, concrete like tunnels, like reinforced, very deep ones, to the point that like the amount of explosives you need to dismantle even 1 kilometer of tunnel is like enormous. Being able to booby trap just like almost every other building, it seems, in these areas that they're fighting in. Obviously being able to embed yourself into the civilian population very effectively, and being able to largely, to a degree, control population, like civilian population movements, so that they're still around you when you're firing at them. And also the 17 plus years, well, actually, really, they were stockpiling weapons even since the late 80s. So like decades worth of weapon stockpiles, the ability to engage in perfidy, the ability to like fight in very tight alleyways, and like going door to door in buildings where bullets can like fly through walls and shit like that. And sorry, yeah, it was just Hamas did really turn Gaza into like easily one of the most militarized regions in the fucking world for per square meter or whatever. Like the amount of shit that they managed to do in that 17-year period, and even before, it was kind of incredible. Like just saying that they're just out of militia, just trying to get by in an asymmetrical war is a little bit silly, a bit of a dumb way to put it. And not to mention the extra variable with the fact that the civilian population can't leave. They can't go to Egypt. They can't go to Israel. So they are just kind of stuck there in an area where nowhere is really safe, where Hamas like has access to just about anywhere that the civilians have access to. Yeah, I don't know. That's a sticky situation. It's not really comparable to any other war that we know about.
Exactly what Hamas got out of this, right? Like Osama bin Laden knew that he couldn't bankrupt the United States of America by taking down the Twin Towers, but he thought he could lure us into a war in Afghanistan that would bankrupt us. Now, it didn't completely, but it, came pretty close. That being said, well, I just mean in terms of how much it drained the treasury, it was way more than any terrorist attack could have possibly done. That being said, the idea that it's not like, I don't think, morally speaking, when you're inflicting this level of suffering on a group...
Can we not hire some of them to work on our infrastructure, Operation Paperclip style? Unironically, like, what an achievement. Fuck me. The campaign against ISIS or Vietnam? Vietnam, no, because, like, much wider area, and the relation between the different forces was different. With ISIS, it's like ISIS had 3 years in Mosul to do what they did. And also, people in the fact that the invading army on the ground in Mosul was the Iraqis, right? So the Iraqis, obviously, the relation between the civilians, ISIS, and the Iraqis is very different between the Gazan civilians, Hamas, and the IDF. And not to mention that there was an evacuation corridor out of Mosul where I think like a few 100,000 people went. ISIS's size, how many ISIS fighters were there at the beginning of the Battle of Mosul? Like between 5 and 10,000, maybe a bit more. Whereas Hamas are like, 3, 4, 5, 6 times the size of that, and also are far more embedded culturally, physically, everything in the civilian population, institutionally in the civilian population. So, yeah, I think it's like Mosul on steroids with Super Saiyan Jitsu. it's very different. Yeah, it's a very exaggerated. I think it's far beyond Mosul from everything I've read about it. But maybe someone can prove me wrong on that.
Group of people that the calculation should be like, well, we want to remove Hamas from power. That's the goal. Justice for October 7th. There's lots of governments around the world that we would, and Hamas isn't exactly a government, but there's lots of regimes around the world that we would all like to see removed, but that doesn't.
Also, I wonder how effective it is, but I really wonder how Hamas's effort at the international propaganda war versus ISIS affected their morale on the ground. That's just because obviously ISIS didn't have any fucking leg to stand on. Everyone hated them. They just made enemies everywhere. Whereas Hamas have actually done, if anything, like they've got more of a will to keep going in the sense that they are actually doing a good job in the propaganda war. Like they keep seeing support for Israel internationally and polling and everything going down, even though it doesn't necessarily translate to big policies. But,
mean that we would approve of any means by which to get there. If you were like, hey, I think Kim Jong-un's government should be dissolved, I'm sure we would all agree with that. But if you were like, I'm going to level the place and just like slaughter people in order to do it, you might be like, okay, hold on. But aside from that, this has been acknowledged at the highest levels of Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence. That there's just no way to get rid of Hamas without it being replaced by more Hamas or Hamas-like group, because it's the basic understanding of this whole situation, right? It's General McChrystal's insurgent math. There's still Hamas people. Hamas are popping back up in the areas that Israel's already leveled, and the more innocent.
This is also ridiculous. This is not like This is not a good argument. Using insurgency logic on something like Hamas, which has had a government and a de facto like state apparatus with institutions and a military, like, yeah, of course you can get rid of these things. Of course you can like degrade them. And of course the new Hamas recruits, who I believe are on average teenagers now, are obviously not going to have the same training, equipment, anything compared to the ones that they're replacing. So
you kill, the more radicalized you're going to get this population, the more these people are going to hate you and join up with the resistance movement. And so I just think that to use the justification that we're trying to get rid of Hamas, and therefore it's not like it doesn't matter how many innocent women and children die in the process.
Of course it
or there's no responsibility on you. You now are not responsible for the bombs that you drop, how many people they kill.
No, of course you're responsible.
So Israel's responsible then?
They're responsible for the means of their retaliation and their war aims. Yes, of course. But
okay.
First of all, let me just say, I totally disagree with your characterization of Osama bin Laden and what he wanted to do. And I don't think that Osama bin Laden's stated public utterances along those lines. But anyway, the reason why the hostages have been released, the numbers that have, is because of constant kinetic force by the IDF. Hamas does not come to the table and ever hand over hostages out of goodwill. It doesn't do it out of the goodness of their own heart. It does it because of the constant kinetic force of the IDF.
What was the question? Sorry, the number. I need to memorize this number because I keep on going back to it and always forget. How much TNT is needed to demolish a kilometer of tunnel? Is it 15 tons? A Bloomberg article about it. I need to memorize that because I keep forgetting. 15 tons of TNT. Wasn't there a report recently that said that the IDF have only managed to destroy a quarter of Hamas's tunnels? Holy shit. 15 metric tons of TNT and dozens of soldiers to place it by hand for 1 kilometer of tunnel, 0.6 miles. Or 12 tons of liquid TNT. Did they say why they don't fill it up with cement? Fuck. Oh god, I hate that so much. Why they don't just plug them. They tried flooding. Did they try filling it? I guess that would just be, 500 kilometers by whatever the height is and the width of cement. Booby traps in tunnels, IEDs, sponge bombs to close the entrances. But if you just close the entrance of a tunnel, doesn't that mean that it can be reopened? Isn't that the issue? I don't know. Yeah, the flooding doesn't work. I don't know.
In Gaza. And if it weren't for that, all 250 hostages would still be there. Second thing is, when it comes to Hamas itself, I totally disagree with the presumption that if you tackle a terrorist entity,
a video,
you will create more terrorists. Ergo, you should not attack the terrorist entity.
That's not the argument that I'm making.
Grumble. Okay. Run or block it. IDF film shows Lebanese reactions. Oh yeah, I've seen this one. This is when they actually did fill up a tunnel with cement and but from the Israeli side, right? And then the Lebanese just saw the cement bubbling up to the surface, and they were like, "Oh shit!" Look, this guy's like, "No shit, there's cement coming up. No, our tunnel, no." And then look, it just comes. Look at it. They just made a cement flood. Get the car away. Shit. But I'm guessing it's just the sheer amount of it that would make that a problem. I don't know.
But okay.
It's a commonly held argument that if you respond to terrorism, you create terrorism. And of course, the only thing that, in that case is you just have to sit back and take
the argument that I'm making is that when you slaughter innocent people,
yes,
those people around them tend to hate your guts. That's the argument that I'm making.
First of all, your characterization of the slaughter, it's horrible, the war in Gaza. It's horrible that young Israelis have to go in yet again to Gaza and try to find Israeli hostages and try to get the leadership of Hamas.
That's what's horrible about it?
It is not the case. Yes, because I think there's a consequence to starting wars.
But so it's not horrible for the people who didn't start a war? Why do we become like these collectivists as soon as a war starts?
For everybody involved.
No, it's the most horrible for the Palestinian people in Gaza right now. That is the group of people who are being fucked over the most right now. No?
Yes, at the moment, yes.
Right.
But they're not being fucked over. The IDF has been moving through Gaza for 18 months. No Israeli soldier I have spoken to ever wanted to go and see the Gaza again. Okay? Nobody wanted to go back. They were dragged back because of Hamas's actions. And if Hamas had acted differently or the Palestinians had voted in different people in to govern them, it would all be different. But again, that's a hypothetical. The reality of the war on the ground is that in this...
Why does he keep saying the Gaza? He honestly sounds like someone who's just trying to make a thing happen. So ridiculous. No one calls it that. It's not even like an old colonial term as far as I know. Maybe it is. So forced though.
Incredibly heavily built up area with weaponry hidden everywhere, with soldiers, spoken to too many of them. They go in, you have a group of people coming out of a civilian building with their hands up, and from their midst come a bunch of Hamas terrorists firing at you in the hope that the IDF will fire back at the civilians. Gadi Eisenkot, one of the members of the war cabinet in the early stages of the war, lost his own son and then his nephew. His nephew was killed in a firefight in Gaza because the Hamas terrorists were firing from a mosque. And that was why Gadi Eisenkot from the Israeli cabinet's nephew died. The whole operating theater is hideous because of what Hamas has done to the Gaza. The reason why Sinwar cropped up in Rafah, finally, the mastermind of October the 7th, one of the most brutal, sadistic psychopaths, to use an overrated term, you can ever imagine, in an Israeli prison, by the way, for having strangled Palestinians to death in the 2000s. But anyway, the reason why Sinwar crops up in Rafah late last year is because there was nowhere else for him to run because of the actions of the IDF to pursue the leadership of Hamas that was responsible for the 7th. Now, can all of Hamas be destroyed? Probably not. Can you make it effectively impossible to function or incapable of functioning? Unable to fire rockets?
You can't stop them making those banger red triangle videos. You can't stop them from sending legal requests to the United Kingdom to stop calling them a terrorist group. Bro, they're still fucking pumping it. Tough watch for you. Who do you hate more? Rogan most? Actually, I don't know. Probably not Dave Smith the most. Douglas Murray and Rogan probably equally. I don't know.
And govern the Gaza? Yes.
Right, but it comes at the price tag of slaughtering tens of thousands of innocent people.
No.
And you're accepting that price?
No. Every single war of this kind will include civilian
I don't know. I can't. Like,
it's
just they're both so undesirable and like in their own unique ways. I think Dave Smith is probably the only one without like any redeeming qualities. At least Douglas is okay on Ukraine, I guess, and not humoring Holocaust denial. At least Rogan is kind of like a silly monkey man. I don't know, man.
Almost certainly disagree on the numbers.
I'm not claiming that the health ministry's numbers are
but there
perfect.
will be almost certainly the best case analysis is that one innocent Gazan has been killed for every one terrorist. That's the best case scenario you can. But that would be almost unparalleled in the laws.
Dave talked about the Palestinian protests. I guess that's maybe.
One is not how the American or British militaries operate in terms of casualties to terrorist ratios. But when we had the campaign against ISIS a decade ago, after ISIS's fighters had gone and massacred people at the Bataclan Theatre in Paris and so on, we used Turkish fighters, brilliant, brave fighters from the Peshmerga militias, to work on the ground. And the French and American and British air forces bombed like hell from the air. And we made ISIS, effectively, touch wood, 10 years later, operationally incapable in capital cities in Europe. Has ISIS as a whole gone away? No. They still have pockets in Syria and in Iraq. But we stopped them from being able to do what they most desired to do. And the same is possible with Hamas. Will they be replaced by some other group? Again, then we get to one of the crucial decision points for the Palestinian people. Is it inevitable that they constantly have to elect people who want to annihilate their neighbors? Or will there ever be a generation that can find a way to live in peace with their neighbors? I agree. Most people don't like being bombed. In fact, nobody does. But if the people of the Palestinians...
How can you say that? It's just saying it in such an erudite fucking English Lord of the Universe accent. Yeah. Most people do not like to be bombed. In fact, nobody does. What a waste of a fucking sentence. Holy shit.
In Gaza... can find it within themselves.
That's a brilliant sentence. What the fuck?
Nobody does. Agree. Most people don't like being bombed. In fact, nobody does.
Wow.
But if the people of the Palestinians in Gaza
he didn't even stumble.
Can find it within themselves to realize the thing they asked for in the election is the thing that has destroyed the area they live in. And like that brave young man 2 weeks ago, in Gaza, who rose up.
It's that elite British education. That's where it goes.
Against Hamas and was identified by the people who remain in Hamas and was tortured and then his body thrown onto his parents' doorstep in the Gaza. Parents started the family, the clan started a bit of a war against Hamas, but that's how Hamas treats Palestinian dissidents. But if there were more people like that young man, and of course, as we all know, the history of totalitarian and terrorist groups running societies is they're very successful and they stay in power because they're willing to torture and use violence and much more. It's a horrible thing you have to contend with. But if more people like that young man had come about in Gaza in the last 18 months or before, yes, it would all be different. And if they could avoid electing a terrorist group that invades their neighbors and fires rockets at their neighbors, yes, it could all be different. It could all be different tomorrow. And I'll tell you, again, there is not a person living by the Gaza in the south of Israel who does not dream of the day that such a generation of Palestinians emerges.
Yeah. I think that a few things here. On Syria there, because it is true. I mean, I think so. Okay, so John Brennan and Barack Obama, the head of the CIA and of course the former president of the United States of America, had a policy of committing literal treason before they ended up accusing Donald Trump of treason, which was all bullshit. But they had a policy of committing literal treason by funding Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the Syrian civil war, poured billions of dollars and tons of weapons into that conflict. When Donald Trump, now it is true, by the way, that you are correct that like there certainly were military actions taken against ISIS after they invaded Iraq, which was not supposed to be part of the plan. there was also a lot of military actions taken by Vladimir Putin.
Trump tried to overthrow the government, by the way. Sorry, he got mad about an election. He's still mad about the election.
Against ISIS after he came in on Assad's request, as you know. In 2017, when Donald Trump came in, one of the best things Donald Trump ever did, he cut off the CIA program to fund the anti-Assad rebels. And this was also a big part of what ended up like taking the the energy out of ISIS. Also, I think there was a lot of good reporting that just they turned enough people on the ground against them. They were even just too radical and just people ended up hating them. It is true that they receded for quite a while, although the former emir of Al-Qaeda, al-Jilani, is now ruling Syria, which does not seem like a great deal or something that people in America should support. The true enemy of the American people, Al-Qaeda, now being in charge.
Let's just not think about anything that he's done in the last 5 or 10 years in relation to Al-Qaeda. Let's just not bother with that, you know? I don't know what it is. Libertarians and fucking retarded opinions on Syria. I don't know why. Why the fuck? Why?
Of Syria. I think that, it's easy to talk about how, like, if the Palestinians had done this different, then maybe things would have worked out different. But I just think, again, when you look at things, when you say, which essentially I think is your point here, right? Which, I mean, I tried to push you on this, but you're saying, look, we can degrade Hamas, but the cost of that is going to be slaughtering a whole bunch of people.
It's not slaughtering, it's war.
Okay, I think you're... okay, they're not being slaughtered. They're being killed. Okay, whatever word you want to use.
They're being killed in a brutal war started by Hamas. Yes.
Yes, it's babies and little kids screaming out for help under rubble, and no help is coming. They sit there under the rubble until they die. That is the level of human suffering that's being inflicted. And if you want to say, well, listen, that's a price that I'm willing to pay to try to degrade Hamas, even though you yourself recognize that we can't totally eliminate them, but we could maybe degrade them or maybe take them down a peg. No. And the price for that is these babies being tortured to death, essentially, whatever you want to call it. Okay. But from the other side of that story, like if there's, like, I got little kids. I don't know if you have kids. I know you have kids, Joe. If anybody ever was saying to me that, like, my kids were the acceptable price for this policy that we want to put into place, I'm saying I don't think there's any scenario, Douglas, where there would be any time where you would accept Israeli kids dying like that as an acceptable price for a policy that you're going to be advocating for.
First of all, again, go back to the what is actually happening. There is no desire or aim by the IAF or the IDF to go into Gaza and kill women and children.
Well, they're doing it, though.
Hang on. There is no desire for that. Does it happen collaterally? Certainly. And that is one of the very ugly rules of war and things that happens in war, and it's another of the reasons why...
Can we not talk about just the last 17 months and how, compared to even like caste-led protective edge, there is so much more than just excessive collateral death. You've got fucking commanders of like full divisions in the Netstream corridor saying, yeah, just shoot whoever, I don't give a fuck, like no warnings, like whatever. And to the point that even like fucking soldiers are like just complaining about this guy still being in charge of them and nothing changing. Or like the thing that we just saw recently with the fucking aid workers that were attacked in the ambulances, and the fact that there was a professional failure from a commander and all they did was demote one person and fire the other, but still no explanation as to why they told their soldiers to go and attack this fucking this convoy, like why they thought it was okay to call it a threat. Not to mention the crimes against prisoners in Sderot Man. It's not just collateral, bro. You need to talk about these. Fuck me. He just makes you want to not trust anything he says about the conflict.
Almost like you shouldn't start a war and hide your rockets and your terrorists inside civilian buildings.
Yeah, but
hang on.
You've made this point a lot of times, but okay.
Well, it clearly can't be made enough because there is no intention on the Israeli side cause the death of non-combatants.
Oh, come on. I mean, listen.
What? You think why do you think the Israelis would want to go and kill children in Gaza?
Listen, let me just, how about I say it like this, okay? And by the way, when I say it like this, I'm not claiming that disputes between nations are the same as handling dispute domestically. I'm just saying on the idea of intentionality or who wants to do this or whatever. Look, if you even if you had the right, let's say somebody broke onto your property and killed some of your family members and you want to go kill this guy. If he goes back to his apartment building and you know that there's women and children in that apartment building, and so your move is to blow up the building, what you would be charged with is murder in the first degree. Cold-blooded, premeditated, intentional.
Okay. Dave could bring up so many examples here that would just force Murray into a position that he'd be really uncomfortable with. I feel like getting Douglas Murray to admit to war crimes, even war crimes that are happening at a pretty high level in the IDF, not to mention the aid blockages, one of which is happening right now, two of which have been directly ordered from the top down, one at the beginning of the war and one since the end of the ceasefire. But Dave Smith is going to talk about how the problem is collateral damage. You wouldn't do it domestically. Well, obviously you wouldn't do it domestically. The reason we have different laws for domestic policing of criminals versus rules of war is that in a domestic situation, if there's a kidnapping situation, you can have a law enforcement agency. You can have police officers go there, and they would have free passage all the way from the station to the building where the hostage situation is happening, and they'd be able to have the negotiation and everything. And there are ways that they can avoid civilian harm fairly effectively. Whereas if another de facto military from a different government, from a different territory that's you're not in control of on the inside, comes and takes a bunch of hostages back into their territory, then you have to go through, and especially in the case of Gaza, not only do you have to cross into territory that you don't have formal administrative powers over on the inside, nor do you have military control over, nor do you have a particularly good rapport with the civilian population. And not to mention in Gaza, where it's literally just lined top to bottom with booby traps and tunnels and weapons and everything else, then yeah, you're probably going to have to go by a different rule book. That's why that's different. Anyway.
Murder. And you could sit there and tell the judge, I didn't want to kill all those people. Why would I want to kill all of those people? I just had to kill that one guy. But that's bullshit. That's not what counts. You did it intentionally. You dropped a bomb knowing that there were women and children in that building. You're taking an action knowing that these innocent people are going to die. Then that is by definition intentional. And you could sit here and talk about, and it is true, there have been documented cases of.
If we're going to talk about intentional, it's it depends on the semantics of how they would use intent. Usually you wouldn't use intentional because obviously if you bomb a building that has say 10 civilians and 2 militants and a weapon stockpile underneath, something like that. If you do that, yeah, you intentionally kill the civilians. You knew they were the collateral risk. You knew they were probably going to die. You did it anyway. Yeah, you intentionally killed them, but the question is did you target them? Were they the reason you hit the building? If the militants and the weapons were gone, would you still have targeted it? Then no. Well, then intentional is did you intentionally authorize the strike that involved civilian death, or did you intend to kill civilians? Did you seek out this target so you kill civilians? If the answer is no, then using the word intentional is a little bit sneaky, I guess.
Hamas placing missiles.
It would be a question of who you targeted. That would be it. And even then, if you want to talk about proportionality, yeah, you can say that if there were 100 civilians and 1 soldier, then you'd be okay, well, you targeted the soldier. You could say you wouldn't have done the strike if the soldier wasn't there, but bro, you also did a pretty unacceptable level of civilian death in your targeting, and that's why it would still be criminal. Yeah.
In mosques and in schools and things like that. But when you look at the aerial footage of Gaza, that does not describe every single strike that Israel has launched. There have been tons of bombs dropped where it's simply, and we have very good reporting on this, where they've literally just have information that they believe with some degree of certainty that a couple of Hamas militants are in this building, and so they blow up the building. That is intentionally murdering innocent people. And if you're going to advocate for this war, I don't see how you can do it without saying that, at least bite the bullet that Madeleine Albright did when she was asked, we've played this clip on the show before, when she's point blank asked about the sanctions on Iraq and our 500,000 children, is that price acceptable? And she said, yes, we believe that price is acceptable. You're saying if you're going to support this war, this is the price of it. So why can't you just say, yes, that price is acceptable? Because then we could have a real conversation about why the other side is going to look at you like a monster.
Because, first of all, I don't agree with any of the characters.
What a very what an invitation to a very open, charitable conversation. The fuck? Okay. I'm just wondering if you would use this for, like, if fucking, but that would mean that, according to Dave Smith, then, basically every army that's ever engaged in urban warfare has intentionally murdered civilians. It's like, from the top down. Like, every army is guilty of it. So at that point, then, the moral standard is just like, what, do you just think, like, if an enemy can get enough civilians around them, then you just should never go to war with them because it's always going to be a monstrous act. Like,
characterization you make, any of it.
Okay.
You say that the Israelis get some information, as if this is like what, they're making it up, or you think the Israelis want to drop a bomb, or like, no, they act on information about where the terrorists are, just like they act on information of where the hostages are. Secondly, when you talk about the destruction in the Gaza, something you probably haven't realized, but is one of the reasons why the destruction looks so bad and is so bad, is because when the IDF were clearing the areas that they'd asked the civilian population to leave and were going house to house, and it isn't just stories here or stories there, it's every second or third house in Gaza that has either munitions or tunnel entrances. Every second or third house. This is not the odd case.
When he's saying house, does he mean buildings? Because a lot of these buildings are flats, right? So he'd be meaning buildings, not house. Is he saying that in like a high rise, every individual flat, every second or third of them has a weapons or a booby trap? I can see that with buildings. I've heard people say that before, but not. Oh, okay.
One of the things that everybody who has been there knows is that you go into a mosque and you know there will be either rockets and or tunnel entrances. You go into a hospital and you know that there will be grenades or tunnel entrances or dungeons or whatever. Just on a lighter note, early in the conflict, when the Shifa complex, which is used as a Hamas headquarters and has also been used as a hospital, but even in 2014, the BBC said this is where Hamas are operating from. When that was shown by the Israelis to have massive weapons stores in the tunnels and cellars underneath it, they had grenades, RPGs, Kalashnikovs, and the BBC's chief Middle East correspondent was asked live on air, why would these things be in a hospital? And Jeremy Bowen said, well, it's perfectly possible because there's a lot of, guns in the Middle East. It's perfectly possible the security department of the hospital had the Kalashnikovs. I said, yeah, and did the grenades belong to the cardiologists? I mean, why? Why is this so normal that every civilian building like this and every second or third house in Gaza is a weapons dump or a place that you enter the tunnels from? But the reason why the devastation, which it is, in the north in particular, but also in Rafah and elsewhere, is what it is because every time the IDF went into an area where they had told the civilians to leave, the Hamas terrorists that remained were in civilian buildings and booby-trapped a very large number of the buildings. So what they did as they proceeded through those areas of the Gaza to clear them was to set off munitions, which the American military and others use, which sets off secondary explosions in places that are booby-trapped. And much of what you see in the photographs that you see and many other people have seen from Gaza is the result of that.
Sorry, I'm busy. Fuck.
It is the result of the IDF trying to clear an area which has been very carefully and well booby-trapped for years. Let me make one other very quick point about the bigger picture that you said.
Is what he's saying true? I'm not really paying that much attention right now because the Huzza. What? The level of booby trapping and the amount of tunnels in each of these areas is probably about accurate. But, I mean, like Sinwar said the same thing, and there's not like, I don't really see any contradictory claim. Like, I don't see people saying, no, that's actually not true. Like, there's lots of, like, what people saying that, like, yeah, that actually this entire neighborhood just had, like, no fucking presence or anything like that. So, I don't know. People might, like, I think the only counter I hear to people like soldiers or analysts who have gone with the IDF or people claiming that there are booby traps or weapons or something, like there's something going on in like maybe every second, third, fourth building, is generally people saying, "Oh, everything is Hamas," which is just not a good counter argument. You know, like the fact that Hamas have done a very good job at embedding themselves as much as possible within the civilian infrastructure of Gaza is not surprising at all. Like, didn't they control like 40% of the mosques even before they properly became Hamas? Like, yeah, they've got a lot of fucking control and power. Yeah, they're an authoritarian government. They can do kind of like whatever they want in all these buildings. So, wouldn't be surprising at all. It's not true the way that Douglas is implying that this is the reason for every strike or every level of destruction, or that necessarily that even the broader policy of proportionality from the IDF is actually legal. Like, it doesn't say anything about that. It also doesn't say anything about responsibilities for protocol when you're operating in areas that have civilians running around as well, in terms of like how like how much doubt does there need to be before you can, or how sure do you need to be before you can fire on someone when everyone basically looks like a civilian? Like, yeah, it doesn't really answer any of those questions. He's just being very broad and very they're all a-okay with it.
Because I think it's important. We were talking about the Syrian. You mentioned the Syrian conflict and ISIS. I think, again, it's really important to keep this in mind, what I said earlier about let's not think we are the primary actors everywhere, or even that important. I remember the debate over the Syrian intervention issue, and at the time, despite being in many cases an interventionist, I said on that occasion that we didn't know what we were doing, clearly didn't know who we were going to back. If you remember, John McCain went to Syria to speak to some rebels, and one of them immediately turned out to be a kind of head-hacking jihadist, and that wasn't great. And I said, I don't have any confidence that we know who to back. And despite many Syrian friends of mine imploring me otherwise, I said, I don't think it's something we can get involved in. However, if you look at the last 10 years or more, what is it now, 13 years of conflict in Syria, the US and the Western powers are not remotely significant actors in that conflict. The significant actors in that conflict always have been, the Russians, the Iranians. I mean, one of the things that blows my mind in the analysis of the region is the fact that the prime mover in the region, the revolutionary Islamic government in Iran that has been oppressing the Iranian people since 1979 and has been holding a great civilization in captivity, that the Iranian revolutionary government in Tehran has literally been colonizing the region. I have this rule about, I took it from Vasily Grossman, the great Soviet Jewish writer, who had this great line about, tell me what you accuse the Jews of and I'll tell you what you're guilty of. This absolutely runs as well with the accusations against the Jewish state in the region. The Iranian revolutionary government is constantly accusing the Israelis of colonialism, of expansionism. It is the Iranian revolutionary government that has been colonizing Iraq, colonizing Yemen, colonizing and destroying Lebanon, and colonizing Syria. And the amazing thing, when you look at the disaster that happened in Syria in the last 13 years, and I don't see it getting especially better under the current jihadist, the disaster is not of our making primarily. We are bit players. America is a bit player in Syria. We are a bit...
Yeah, but you mentioned Iraq in there too.
I know. Well, with the great idiocy of that was that Iraq notices our failings, our lack of staying power, our desire to get out as soon as possible, and much more, which is all understandable, whether you agree with it or not. Hang on.
Come on.
And they moved
Iraq
in. And they moved in, of course.
No, Iraq is not over. Not for Dave.
Talking about Syria. In the Syrian theater, the main actors are not us. And one of the things I'm still interested in about this mindset that you have is, why does it always have to be us?
Always.
It's other people who have actions in the world. The Russians, the revolutionary government in Iran, they are so busy
I think this is all about framing here, because I don't think I've ever once made this claim. You've made this point several times so far, but I've never once made the claim that everything is always us. I think you're the one who's downplaying the influence and impact that we have. We are, after all, when I'm saying we, I'm saying the United States.
He's such a slimy debate lord little fucker, this Dave Smith guy. He's always doing this thing where all he talks about is American or Western exceptionalist explanations for everything that goes wrong in the world. And then as soon as someone calls him out and he's like, well, I don't say that America does everything bad. Like, it's like fucking, like, it's just, he knows what the comment is actually is saying, but he just doesn't want to engage with it.
It's America's federal government is the largest, most powerful organization in the history of the world. It is the world empire. And to sit there and say Iran colonized Iraq, no, George W. Bush invaded the country on a bunch of lies, a war that you supported. He went in there and overthrew Saddam Hussein and installed democracy in the Shiite majority country. Of course, he handed the thing over to Iran, but to say that had no.
So having a Shia majority in Iraq means that you're handing it to Iran. Is that what happens? What the fuck? Okay.
Impact on Syria, or that the U.S. military funding and arming the anti-Assad rebels had no impact. I'm not claiming the entire thing is America. Bashar al-Assad was an actor. There were other forces there aside from the U.S. Meddling there. But at the same time, you got the most powerful.
Speaking as Saddam Hussein, all of a sudden, well. I mean, people like this kind of do that. They accidentally end up in a lot of like Saddam Assad apologia, but
government in the history of the world, who, as we all know, put Syria on its 7 countries in 5 years list of who we're going to go overthrow. And it's had a profound impact on the region. Of course it did. It was a huge contributing factor.
But literally, like, Obama had that red line over chemical weapons in Syria, but then when it happened, they didn't do, like, the intervention in Syria did not happen to the degree that people who opposed Assad wanted it to be. No? Okay.
To that civil war to begin with.
I think America is obviously a major actor. Certainly could be, is meant to be the major actor on the world stage. I think that the history of the region and many other regions around the world is that America does not have either the staying power, the capability, the intelligence, the kind of people that you would produce in order to have the kind of impact that you actually think it has. American weakness in the Middle East has been, I mean, I say this as somebody obviously from Britain, but when Britain was a dominant world power, she produced the type of person who was keen to go and be a governor of, a stan somewhere and learn the local dialects and, run the civil service.
You guys were better at empire than we are.
The point is that they produced that sort of person because they wanted to stay. America has never produced that sort of person, and it certainly hasn't in the Middle East in particular. It acts militarily on occasions, and in my view, sometimes well, sometimes poorly. But the reason why America was so badly outplayed by the mullahs in Iraq was simply that, as you say, after the war, America had nothing like the staying power of the mullahs in Tehran, had nothing like the ability to effect post-war change like the Iranian revolutionary government did. And so, yes, if we create a vacuum like that, or somebody else creates a vacuum, and after all, we did not cause the beginning of this.
Did you read his book? No, I'm never going to read his fucking book. It's probably fucking nonsense. I don't even know what is it about. He did one about the death of Europe or some shit. What's his new one? Douglas Murray, Democracies and Death Cults. Yeah, that sounds like a shit book. I don't care.
We, the West, I'm saying on this occasion, did not cause the beginning of the Arab Spring, as it was optimistically called at the beginning, or the beginning of the revolutionary uprising in Syria in 2011. These things were ground up, and the actors in the region moved in much more deftly and effectively than we did. It's the same with Lebanon. It's the same with Lebanon. America doesn't even have eyes over Lebanon. Iran has an army that has a checkpoint at Beirut airport that will check you on behalf of Hezbollah when you come in there. You can't tell me that America is, just because America's on paper and much more has the power, that America is the deft operator in the Middle East. There are so many people who outwit America in the Middle East all the time.
Yeah, but you can't tell me that there hasn't been an impact from the $8 trillion that we've spent there and the multiple regime changes all around the Middle East that were done by America. These weren't just going to happen on their own. Are you saying that didn't have an impact?
Iraq was certainly done by America, of course.
Okay. So Iraq was certainly done by America. Libya?
NATO.
Right. But okay. But NATO is the
Rafik Hariri checkpoint is fighting with Hezbollah 24/7. Wait, what was I listening to? What was that in response to? Fuck, I don't know. I'm miles away, man. Fuck this conversation. Oh, God.
European wing of the American empire. I mean, let's get real. That's an American decision.
Oh.
Right. I'm saying it's not because some random European country decided.
Go back, just because, I mean, the Libyan intervention, I was pretty iffy about at the time. But that was done not to create an empire or anything like that. It was done for one very clear reason. And I remember the debates in the European capitals and in Washington, D.C. at the time. There was a belief that after the uprising against Gaddafi began, that there would be a mass slaughter, genocide carried out by Gaddafi against the people.
So we're talking in 2011?
And it was 2011, yeah. There was a belief. Everybody believed it. He had started his son, if you remember, Saif Gaddafi, formerly of the London School of Economics, showing that we can produce the best. Saif Gaddafi stood up and said, "We will fight to the last bullet," and so on. And everybody believed them. And the desire to intervene was caused in an attempt people do not want the resources of Libya. Nobody wanted Libya to fall
apart. It was when
apart.
the tanks were rolling to Benghazi, right? Yeah, Gaddafi was calling the fucking people sewer rats, and yeah, he did say he was basically just going to exterminate his fucking opponents. Now, later on, the British did come out with a report that said that the failures were that a lot of it was rhetorical, that they didn't really, that they maybe took it more literally than it actually was going to be. And also that they completely underestimated the strength of the Islamist forces that would very quickly enter the power vacuum. That's kind of like, it was obviously a mistake. Like, Libya got fucked. I don't know how different, like what Libya would have looked like had Gaddafi succeeded in quelling the civil war, and quelling the opposition, but it is what it is. Yeah, but it's like it's just seen as a pretty, like, it's just a failure. That's what it was. Not anything sinister, I don't think. Just like a monumental fuck up.
Or anything like that.
No.
They did it because there was a genuine belief in what was called at the time, which has gone out of fashion, but right to protect, duty to protect.
Then
and that was why they went in.
So if that's
it's
why,
just important to keep that
it's interesting.
sort of nuance
It's interesting.
around.
I don't think it's correct. I mean, you always kind of like ascribe the best of motives to Israel and the West, and nothing but the worst of motives to all of their enemies. So just riddle me this then: if we just went in
with Israel, it might be different, but with the West, it's like, yeah, generally the West doesn't talk about how we're going to destroy, like NATO forces don't say we are going to wipe a country off the face of the earth. We don't describe other nations as like a cancer that needs to be eradicated. Like, obviously, you would be more charitable to like a Western intervention in Libya than you would be to the Russian intervention in Ukraine, or like an Iranian intervention against Israel. But
because there was this uprising in 2011, and because we were worried that Gaddafi was about to go genocidal, something that the UK Parliament did an investigation into and found out said was just completely wrong.
We don't say it. What does that mean, though? What is I guess Trump wants to take Greenland, but we don't ascribe. But I don't know what Douglas says, but we don't really ascribe charity or good faith to those kinds of things. Like, yeah, he sounds fucking insane when he says that. If we're talking about Libya, like, do you think the West was trying to obliterate Libya? Like, they weren't trying to stop what seemed like a very convincing threat at the time because of how fucking mental Gaddafi was and his rhetoric?
But why is it then that I got 4-star General Wesley Clark, Supreme Commander of the NATO forces? Why is it that he told me that he saw the plans in 2001 to overthrow Gaddafi, and that this was part of a strategy to overthrow 7 governments in 5 years, and all of them except one have been done?
There's
at
always
this
this whole
point.
thing where like it's just such a he won't ever say this was like a conspiracy that just kind of like was all orchestrated and like planned out by the West. Like the Arab Spring obviously was that part of the plan too? Was that orchestrated by the West? He always does this fucking, why do I have this 4-star general? Like, because probably, and this has always been the case in a lot of these different intelligence units and militaries is that people draw up contingency plans and hypotheticals or aspirational ideas for all kinds of things. We know this because Israel massively fucked this one up, at least when they were speaking to me, because that intel lady from the Alma Center said that Hezbollah always publishes these aspirational plans to conquer the Galilee. It's always aspirational, right? Like they make little videos about it. They talk about how they're going to penetrate the border from 5 points and all that. And they've been talking about it for 10 years. But then she says they're aspirational. It's just a fucking thing that they talk about. And that October 7th was dismissed as an aspirational plan that didn't actually have any concrete ramifications. But when Israel actually invaded Lebanon and carried out the pager explosion, they started saying, Operation Conquer the Galilee, that was like a real thing. They were actually going to do that. They were ready to go and fucking pounce in. But there's no evidence of that, I don't think, that we saw. It was still like considered aspirational. They just used that as their pretext afterwards because the pager attack was like a use it or lose it kind of. Like of every army in the world that's drawn up some plan, right? Probably like 90+% of them don't get implemented. So
you're telling me it's just complete coincidence that he saw that the neoconservatives had this plan to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, and then 10 years later we happen to do it when we have the opportunity? The two aren't related at all?
First, nice to hear the N word again.
The N word? Did I say that?
Conservatives.
Oh, that one. I was thinking of a different one. Okay.
First of all, I would hope.
People used to call it the Lebanon, right?
Military planning for absolutely everything. I would hope that there is a scenario for absolutely everything somewhere in the American Pentagon or whatever.
Yeah, but he didn't say they're drawing up war games. He said
okay, Douglas Murray is actually a shit debater, or at least he's not targeting the kind of arguments that I think are more convincing. Ask him, okay, so as part of this plan was fomenting the Arab Spring. Was that part of the plan? Really? If I look at these plans, are they like, we need to foment an Arab Spring, like an uprising across the entire Middle East and North Africa? And we also, I guess, we need to convince Gaddafi to threaten to exterminate his fucking opposition, compare them to sewer rats to give us pretext. Is that all part of the Western plan as well? Or was that just like, oh, we just got incredibly lucky?
And that we're going to...
I would assume that, I would hope that any major power like America would have plans in place for almost everything that is likely, including, I mean, America could have... should have started planning for some kind of kinetic force in Libya from the 1980s. Of course, there'd be plans.
Yeah, but again, this is not what Wesley Clark said. He wasn't saying like we've drawn up war games. We've drawn up war games with everybody. We have war games with China, war games with Russia. We've mapped out how a kinetic war would work, even with countries that have nuclear arsenals. Like just in case we have to fight a traditional war and nukes aren't being used. That's not what he's talking about. He said that not only he was told. We're in Afghanistan now. This is late 2001. He goes, next we're going to Iraq. After that, we're going to Libya. After that, we're going to Syria, Somalia.
Do I want to look at these plans and actually see how, because I feel like, I just have a feeling some of these plans might be, they might overlap a little bit with what happened, but Dave Smith is probably going to like retroactively sort of reword it in a way that makes it correspond to exactly what happened, make it look like it was completely inevitable and it was all part of the, fuck. Where is it though? Where would I get it? Oh no. Wesley Clark. Invade 7 countries, 2001 plan. Let's see. 5-year. Book on Modern Wars. In Clark's book, Winning Modern Wars, published in 2003, he describes a conversation with a military officer in the Pentagon shortly after 9/11 regarding a plan to attack 7 countries in 5 years. As I went back through the Pentagon in November 2001, one of the senior military staff officers had time for a chat. Yes, we were still on track for going against Iraq, he said, but there was more. This was being discussed as part of a 5-year campaign plan, he said. And there were a total of 7 countries, beginning with Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. So America's gone to do what in these countries? Hang on. Attack 7 countries. So did America attack Lebanon? No. Syria, yeah, kind of. Libya, definitely. Somalia, yeah. I don't know how many attacks America's done in Sudan. Iran, this is definitely not in 5 years, though. This is in like 20+ years. So it's in this book, Winning Modern Wars, the full crazy plan. But this wasn't part of the same campaign as the Iraq War. Like, how could they have predicted for the Iraq War to snowball into what happened in Syria? Or how could they have predicted, like, yeah, so the plan didn't happen, in other words. Like, okay, fuck me. But Dave Smith should probably specify that this is a 5-year plan. Yeah, Somalia, they're fighting with Al-Shabaab. Salon article about it. Yeah, this is just conspiracy theory. Like, it's just retroactively changing something that, yeah, this guy probably heard, but then taking out the bits of it that don't match what really happened and adding in a few bits that do. Cringe. What a giga cringe. Ooh. Has he ever been asked about this since? I guess Dave Smith probably counts Israel's incursions into Lebanon as American, right? His face. What
was it, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. He laid out everybody. We have war games with China, war games with Russia. We've mapped out how a kinetic war would work, even with countries that have nuclear arsenals, like just in case we have to fight a traditional war and nukes aren't being used. That's not what he's talking about. He said that not only he was told, we're in Afghanistan now. This is late 2001. He goes, next we're going to Iraq. After that, we're going to Libya. After that, we're going to Syria, Somalia.
Do you see how he's retroactively, like, he's doing the order as if, like, that's what was said in the plan, even though, yeah, he's saying, like, oh, yeah. So what he's more or less doing, like, so what this plan said in 2003 was, they said, well, first we're going to go to Iraq, and then we're going to, I guess, wait for an Arab Spring to happen, and then we're going to go and intervene in Libya, but not after we've convinced Gaddafi to basically threaten to genocide half of his people, and then we're going to go into Syria, but not after we've tried to get Assad to stop arming fucking Al-Qaeda militants and letting them cross the border into Iraq, and then we're also not even going to go into Syria as much as the rebels in Syria would have liked us to. We're actually going to warn further escalations in Syria, but then not actually do them, like after the chemical weapons attacks. And then we're going to go to Somalia, but not after we convince the Somali government to ask America to intervene against Al-Shabaab. And and then we're going to go to Lebanon, but actually we're going to get Israel to do that one. No, that's not. During the Blitzer interview, Clark backed off slightly, conceding that the memo wasn't necessarily a plan. Maybe it was a think piece. Maybe it was sort of national concept. Fuck me.
Sudan, and finishing off with Iran. He laid out the path of what we're about to do, and then we did it in the next administration. You don't think there was any connection between those two?
What, we did Somalia and Sudan?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If you go look at the list of 7 countries, it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, I believe Somalia, Sudan, and Iran, I believe.
Why would America want to do any of those things? Who wants to do it?
Well, what he said is that essentially these plans, he said later in an interview with Piers Morgan, that he had seen the plans at first in 1991, that they came from Paul Wolfowitz, that basically then they got, what's funny about what the 4-star general said?
Okay, continue.
No, I'm just curious.
He always say, hi. So the thing I read from the 4-star general, I mean, what's the problem with this 4-star general? Did I remind you there's a 4-star general?
It's laughable about this.
Paul Wolfowitz is a great figure for almost any deep conspiracy in this country, because he was a Deputy Secretary of Defense at the highest in life. He is forever being ascribed almost supernatural power.
I don't think anyone's
the highest position he ever got to was as Donald Rumsfeld's deputy, and it's a very strange thing always when Wolfowitz's name comes up, because he was a relatively.
I can see now why. So for this 5-year plan was from 2003. It was from 1991. Okay, it's interesting how Dave Smith is. Is this why he's okay with people like Darryl Cooper? Is it because he's found that he actually has a lot of overlap with people who are into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and Holocaust denial and things like that? Like, his audience is just, I guess that's why Candace Owens loves him, right? Because Paul Wolfowitz, like, that's a very apparently, if Douglas Murray is saying that he's like he's basically known as a go-to for conspiracy theorists, even though he didn't really have that much power. Yeah, well,
low-level person to whom almost everything can be ascribed. And
Well,
find
I didn't
strange.
describe, again, this is
Anyway,
such a
but yeah,
straw man.
anyway,
I didn't ascribe
but-
everything
Sorry,
to him. I'm literally telling you what
countries. But anyway, go on.
No, I'm
sorry.
telling you what the 4-star general said about him. And I wouldn't
About
say
Paul Wolf.
Deputy
The 4-star
Secretary
general, don't
of
forget the
Defense is
4-star
like
general.
a nothing position. It's a pretty consequential position.
Not
He has
as
lots of
important as
stars.
Rumsfeld or Cheney, but yeah.
Yeah, agreed. But who said it was?
No, fire on.
I just feel like you're batting down straw men. I never said that he is the creator of all conspiracies or anything. I'm literally saying that the 4-star general said that he first
I
saw.
love that again. It's like, oh, so America has the aspiration to get involved in all these 7 countries, and they've gotten involved in all 7 of them. And this was a plan that was seen in the beginning of the Iraq War. And actually, it originates from 1991 with this guy called Paul Wolfowitz. And it's like, whoa, okay, this is, okay, so you're holding the plans of someone who was a deputy of Rumsfeld in 91, and his plans are that's why America got involved in 5 or 6 of these countries since 1991. It was all part of the plan. And he's like, no, I'm not saying that Wolfowitz is in charge of every conspiracy. Like, fuck off, Dave. Fucking mollusk. He knows what he's doing. Just, you drop the conspiracy, you just drop it in as a thought. And everyone realizes what you're doing. The conspiracists realize that you're basically saying there's a grand plan by Wolfowitz, and it started in 91. It's all American, like hegemony, etc. And then the people who oppose you realize what you're doing because they realize that you're basically just ascribing far too much power and agency to a singular malicious character in the United States. And he gets to say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not saying he controls the world.
The plans from him that he had brought this to the National Security Advisor, and it had basically been like, we'll look at this after the election, and that then it was resurrected later by Richard Pearl, and that these guys were producing. Again, not me saying this. This is 4-star General Wesley Clark.
4-star general.
In a study
He's got 4
paid
stars
for by the Israelis. And yeah, you can laugh at this all you want to, Douglas, but you can go read the.
Did I mention that this guy's a 4-star general? Guys, Wesley Clark, 4-star general, 4-star general, a general of 4 stars. Star of the 4's general, 4-star. Some call him Mr. 4-star. Look out your window. How many stars do you see? Pretend you see 4. That's how many stars this general has, okay? Fuck. Chat, respect the goal. We're 1 out of 10, okay? 1 out of 10. We need a few stars, a few super chat stars to fill the goal, okay? Don't make me beg, okay? I got a 4-star general with your names on it, but it doesn't come for free, okay? 4 stars. It ain't cheap.
Clean break memo for yourself. This was the neoconservative strategy, along with their counterpart, the Likuds in Israel, that they wanted to remake the region
in a way.
Okay, and I'm sure by their own justification, they believed that democracy would sweep the region and it would be better off for them. Nonetheless, they pursued this path that has ended in nothing but disaster. And I don't think that to say that in 2011, it was like a purely humanitarian mission to go overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, I do not think is right.
Well, first of all, before I get to the substance of it, why would they want the current situation in Libya?
Huh?
Why would they want the current situation in Libya?
It's like a really good question.
Because they wanted
yes.
Gaddafi out.
For what? So it can be the way it is now, with a perpetual civil war / frozen conflict with the GNA and General Haftar. So Russia can get involved with the Wagner Group, where we can have like a fucking slave economy where you can't do any business, you can't do any like economic development, or you can't really like extract any wealth or resources, or you can't do any trade deals, you can't do any fucking development, like nothing. You can't do anything. The shithole. All for the military-industrial complex. Lauren, thanks for the $20. Really appreciate that. The 4-star General Lonerbox. True. That's me. Thanks for the $4.99. I'm doing my part. Yeah, you are. Good. Jack O'Lantern, thanks for the $2. A 4-star general told me to super chat. You know, Lauren Rubenstein, thanks for the $50 for the 4 cause. That's so generous of you. My God. Rubenstein. I hope there are no 4-star generals watching this stream, because in 10 years, Dave Smith, this fucking prick, I don't even run out of adjectives. Dave Smith is going to be like, listen, I can just hang on while I pull out of my back pocket a 4-star general who appeared in the Lonerbox YouTube chat. His name is Rubenstein. And then all the fucking Nazis in the audience are like, whoa, fucking hell, man.
Why?
Well, okay, if you read the clean break memo...
Thank you so much. That's a 4-star... That is a 4-star donation right there. My God.
Their argument essentially is that you wanted to have regime change against the hostile surrounding Muslim countries.
I know. It's so surprising that Israel would be talking about the prospect of getting rid of dictators who want to destroy their country. That's crazy. Why? Isn't it such a coincidence that like America went in to get rid of Saddam, but also Israel wanted Saddam gone? Why? Why would Israel want Saddam gone? You know, what did Saddam ever do or say about Israel? Fucking hell, bro.
But
was Gaddafi not hostile to Israel?
Bro.
To Israel, yeah, sure. But he was, I mean, the Europeans and everybody else in NATO found that Gaddafi was a really relatively easy person to get on with latterly.
Right? Yeah, no, I think it was an insane policy.
No, but you'll notice that after he hands over the nuclear program and thus makes himself very vulnerable, unfortunately, for the future of world peace, Libya has been unutterably disastrous for
I'm sorry,
Europe. Hang on.
No, just a clarifying question.
Disastrous for Europe.
I agree with you.
And Somalia and Sudan.
Also, how much of an issue for Israel was Gaddafi? What was he doing? I mean, I know he wasn't pro-Israel. The one-state binational solution, that was his son's proposal. I don't know if Gaddafi himself pushed for that. Isratin, yeah, that was his son, though, wasn't that? Was Saif Gaddafi. Holy shit. Nemo Nobody with the $44. U.S. wanted 4-star General Haftar. Holy shit. He sent a shit ton of aid and weapons. Okay. Did not know that. Was he doing that when he was hanging about with Tony Blair and shit like that in the late 2000s? When did he do that? When was Gaddafi arming Palestinians? I don't know this. In the 70s? Okay, surely we're not talking about the 70s, right? When did because I thought Gaddafi was starting to become more warmed up to Western people. He sent a lot of aids. Wow. He supported Sudan's president Omar al-Bashir despite charges of genocide in Darfur. Brilliant. Yeah, because the US removed Gaddafi's regime from the list of states supporting terrorism in 2007, 2008. That's all part of the plan, though, okay? Because the 4-star general, who's just over there, told me just now that was part of the plan. That was actually to lure Gaddafi into a sense of false security. That's why America took Libya off of the list of countries that are aiding terrorism. It was just to make him feel more chill before they planned the Arab Spring. And the guy who set himself on fire with the tomatoes.
Why does America or Israel want to do regime change in Somalia?
Can I just ask you a clarifying question on this? When you say that was a disaster for the prospects of world peace, you mean overthrowing Gaddafi was a disaster?
I say that him being, sorry, I should have clarified. My thing is him being overthrown after he's given over.
You know what else was part of the plan? The 4-star general's plan. It was to sneak in double agents into every single Security Council member's office and get them all to vote in favor of intervention against Gaddafi. You realize this, right? You realize the Security Council voted in favor of intervention against Gaddafi. Anyway, sorry, I'm just got 4-star generals in my brain. Listen, chat, you're all 4-star generals in my heart, okay?
Nuclear weapons is because it leaves on the table this thing that you have to hold.
China and Russia conveniently abstained. That's all in the plan, Cradling. You're just not aware, sorry. Because you're not in touch. You don't have enough 4-star general friends. I have loads, okay? Most of my friends are 4-star generals. Some of them good people, great people, the best kind.
Hold on to nuclear weapons, and if you don't hold on to nuclear weapons, you could be dead.
Do you think maybe the Israelis should stop using the term the Libyan model to push for negotiations with Iran?
No, I don't think anyone should use what happened to Gaddafi as being a good precursor.
We certainly have a lot of agreement there. It was an absolute disaster, particularly to let a guy get sodomized to death after he denuclearized is not a good precedent to set.
Are you he's so stupid. He's so fucking stupid. Like, what the fuck was that? What? It's the even assuming everything's factually true, it's like if you learned the story from these guys, if like you don't know anything about Libya or Western intervention and you go to Dave Smith, you've come out of this lesson knowing that, okay, there was a plan started in 1991 by a Jew, verified by a 4-star general. America plans to fuck with 7 countries. They actually end up fucking with 6. out of 7. And then they go into Libya and they bomb the shit out of them and get rid of Gaddafi for no reason. Because all Gaddafi did that we know about is that, well, Israel didn't like him. Okay, yeah, Israel didn't like him. And remember, the plan came from a Jew in America. And the 4-star general told me that. And they went to Libya, destroyed the place, destabilized. And it was actually, all Gaddafi did was he denuclearized, you know? And then they sodomized him to death. That's the story. That would be the story if you only heard it from Dave Smith. A Jew makes a plan in 1991. America goes and does stuff in the Middle East, intervenes. Gaddafi denuclearizes. The Israelis still don't like him. The other Jews still don't like him. America gets him sodomized. Like, this is the story. What a fucking domino effect. 1991, a Jew had a plan. Gaddafi gets a fucking spike up his ass. Jesus. And we all know this, okay? Because of a very bright 4-star general, a very reliable, fine man.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why.
One of the reasons why Iran wants a nuke so bad.
On, and I'm not sure it's just to avert being sodomized to death, as you put it, but yeah, they want a nuke because they. I mean, if you like what the Iranian Revolutionary Government's done since 1979, you'd love what they'll do with the world when they've got a nuke. But anyway, put that aside for a second. I mean, I'm sorry, we slightly come back to where we started, but when you start talking about Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, I just... Also,
Iran launches missiles at fucking Pakistan. These guys don't give a fuck about nukes for defensive reasons. What are you talking about? Like, Iran is happy to fight with the nuclear powers. Like, okay, whatever. Fuck. They fire missiles at Israel. Sorry. I should watch my tongue, though, because, you know, there might be, you know, despite my close cabal of numerous 4-star generals, I don't know all of them, so there might be one out there. There might be one in Dave Smith's other back pocket who knows that Iran actually has very legitimate defensive reasons for wanting their nuclear weapons.
It's all awfully noxious smelling. Richard Pearl was a member of the Defense Policy Board, which had an advisory capacity toward the Pentagon in the early 2000s. But it was by no means a policy board that dictated Pentagon policy. Okay. In the last 30 years of American foreign policy, there have been many major actors. And Paul Wolfowitz is a relatively major. But we come slightly back full circle.
Okay, we can speed it up. Don't worry, guys.
You're guilty of this, certainly not knowingly. In my view, when people start talking about Paul Wolfowitz, I always remember that line of Mark Stein's many years ago, and he said, you can't help thinking that one of the reasons why people find Wolfowitz so appealing to talk about is that his name starts with a nasty animal and ends Jewish. People love saying Wolfowitz.
It's such a great name.
It is for any
movie. Because they he's perfect for it. Perfect for it.
And he looks perfect for it.
Right, you'll say, oh, the crafty Paul Wolfowitz.
His crazy eyebrows.
So you're a bigot. You're a Jew hater if you mention the neocons?
No. Just let me continue with the thought. So, I remember those
wounded
days, and his boss, Donald Rumsfeld, was like the ruler of the world at that time. He had such charisma, such genius was attributed to him for the initial invasion of Iraq. Like, people, you can't imagine the admiration that existed in the defense establishments around the world for Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney was so powerful that people of right and left, particularly on the left, spent all those years in the W. Bush administration saying W. wasn't the real president. He was being run by Dick Cheney because he was the brilliant, etc., etc.
You're certainly listening to him at the beginning.
Okay, but I'm just saying it goes back to this thing of when certain ideas catch hold and what's really going on in them. Now, to attribute American foreign policy in the last 40 years to Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Pearl is knowingly or otherwise to encourage a conspiracy that has very obvious legs. Yeah. And I just urge you not to do it.
Okay, let me respond to this a little bit. First of all, I did not...
Is it just a coincidence? I didn't say that Paul Wolfowitz controls the world and taps his fingernails together. Yeah. Go on, Dave. Do the technique. Do the worm.
And I just urge you not to do it.
Okay, let me respond to this a little bit. First of all, I did not... It is not at all saying that these guys, therefore, just control everything.
Hey,
I'm just pointing out
there it is. Well done, buddy.
Claimed where plans originated and that they ended up being implemented. That doesn't mean that they were the absolute ruler or arbiter of what was going to happen. But again, I got to say, for you to say that I can't bring up the neoconservative.
I never said you couldn't. I just laughed.
Let me just right. But the implication is that I'm unwittingly giving fertile ground to some like Jew-hating conspiracy if I bring up a guy who's got a Jewish last name who was a consequential person in our government. This is like identical to the arguments of the woke left. That would just be like, oh, if you even say something, if you bring up the crime rate in Chicago.
Yeah, sorry, I don't care how Jewish you are. We're timing you out for saying that shit in chat. Sorry, use as Zaid. Take a break. Get a sandwich.
Or basically a bigot because other people could take this and run with it.
Come on.
No, you come on. What's the argument?
Look, if you said to me...
I said a four-star general said something, and there's what's the response?
If you said to me, or somebody said to me, don't you think that some people are running the global financial system? And I said, possibly. And I said, who do you think it is? And they said, the Rothschilds. I think I'd be right in saying there was something a bit off about the character of the person doing that, because it seemed like they were playing to some kind of lazy old trope. And I think similarly that if you give the implication that a cabal of people, particularly, and you should be really careful about this because of the people who will come up underneath you, if you give the implication that these cabals exist and you decide to elevate the Jews or people with Jewish names in it and then play down the non-Jews, I can tell you, you will be opening up a world of madness.
But am I really playing down the non-Jews? I mean, go look at the stuff that I've said about Obama, about George W. Bush.
You said Middle East policy is Dick Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz, and I said,
no. I mean, this is why I'm saying this is a woke leftist tactic. I literally just mentioned that a four-star general said this. I'm quoting him, and now you're telling me that this is the same thing as promoting.
Don't pretend to me that when you quote somebody, it's a totally arbitrary thing that you just pluck out of the air. You decided
I'm not arguing that it's arbitrary. I'm saying I'm using the quote for a reason. I was connecting it to an argument.
And I'm saying to you,
I'm giving fertile ground to Jew haters to mention.
Yeah.
I think that when you decide to elevate what is a conspiracy of people who are overthrowing the governments of various countries, some of which haven't been overthrown and others of which have.
I feel like Douglas Murray, his arguments are just, it's all narrative the way he talks. He's not really explaining like fact. So if you wanted to engage with why what Dave Smith is saying is conspiratorial, it's because first of all, let's assume I didn't know this was like a 5-year plan, right? It's like, assume you're just going with what he's telling you, because sometimes you have to. You don't always know the details of these things. You can be like, okay, so there's this plan that originates in 1991 to overthrow 7 Arab countries or Middle Eastern countries. And then it's like, okay, and was part of this plan like the Arab Spring? Was part of this plan Gaddafi's response to the Arab Spring for Libya? Was part of this plan to get al-Shabaab to ask America for help, for Somalia to ask America for help against al-Shabaab? Like, is it not a bit weird that you're basically just describing all of these developments that were so unpredictable? Like, really, you think people were predicting that from 2003 in Iraq, you would have a fucking snowball that leads to the civil war in Syria, that leads to where you've got the Arab Spring in the Middle East and North Africa? Like, what about the countries that didn't get attacked? Why not? Like, why didn't they go into Lebanon? Or what you said that Israel has an interest against these countries? Well, why? Why do you think Israel would have an issue with fucking Libya, with Syria, with Iran? I don't know. I feel like you would, and it just sounds like he's ascribing so much to one quote or one plan. It's like, was this plan actually like implemented into policy? Did he say that? Was it just aspirational? Like, what other plans were in place as well? Like, what was the time scale on this plan? You can even just ask him. But again, it's like, are you telling me that this plan is actually that what's happened in the last 25 years with American intervention in the Middle East is all according to this plan? With all of the things, like, is the Russian Wagner involvement in Libya, was that part of the plan? Or Russian involvement in Syria, is that part of or is there contingency for that? Like, I'd ask more details about this plan, for one. But, fuck.
They were not overthrown by American dominance, certainly not in Syria. And then you say that the people who are doing it are these people with Jewish names. I think you should be more judicious than that, because you probably know what bubbles up underneath.
More judicious? Wow, Douglas. Wow.
Online by now.
Minus 4 stars.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no question that there are, no matter what, and by the way, it's funny just hearing you say this to me. I mean, look, and by the way, I completely agree with you. I think you've been one of the best champions on opposing Europe's insane immigration policy. I also think the United States of America's had an insane immigration policy. I'm happy to see that that seems to be being reversed. But imagine you made a point about immigration, and I were to say to you, be careful what's bubbling up online, because now look, the fact is, if you are taking a position that opposes, say,
that's actually a great argument. Yeah. Douglas Murray, like, how would you feel if Tommy Robinson was citing you? That would be a good question from Dave Smith. It's actually valid. Go on.
Muslim immigration into the UK, then yes, it is quite possible that a lot of people who really just hate Muslims are going to end up liking what you had to say or following you.
I mean,
but that doesn't mean you're responsible to it. And if I were to say that to you, you would be the first to very...
Israelis love Douglas Murray. Like, not once did I hear random fucking Israelis, even Israeli leftists, some of them, or like anti-government Israelis, maybe center, being like, oh yeah, you should check out Douglas Murray. I'm like, yeah, should I? He's going to tell us what's going on, what I have to look forward to in Europe, apparently.
Eloquently point out that that is a complete non-argument. The question is this policy good or is it bad? And whether there's not, and if you want to say to me, hey, I should like disclaim when I make this point that like, hey, I'm Jewish, I love Jewish people, the fact that there were some Jewish people involved in our foreign policy establishment does not mean that it's the Jews, then fine, I'm happy to say that. But I just think it's a non-argument to say that like, oh, you know, you're kind of like you're creating fertile ground for this hatred. If I'm being completely honest, I think we've seen what you're talking about bubbling up on Twitter. Do you think that's gotten worse over the last 18 months?
Yeah, sure.
Right. I think kind of what Israel's doing in this war and the U.S. funding and arming it have been something that is really a great facilitator for that stuff to bubble up.
As I say, we could go back to I disagree. I think that Israel has every right to go in and destroy the terrorist group that carried out the massacre.
Yes, but again, but no one's arguing that they have the right to destroy the terrorists. The question is they have the right to kill innocent people.
Again,
Okay, Dave, what military technique are you aware of that no one else has apparently brought forward of how to fight Hamas without killing civilians? Because what Dave Smith actually said, according to his logic, is he just justified murder of civilians. He just promotes the murder, in his view, the intentional murder of civilians. Because if you target Hamas, civilians are going to die. Sorry. Special forces. Yeah. Send in Doron. Just put him on a catapult, his big baldy head from the guy from, the lead guy from Fauda, the baldy guy. Just put him on a catapult and fire him into the center of Gaza. The moonlight bouncing off his baldy head, blinding the militants. And then he does a thing where he just runs through a fucking tunnel and doesn't get hit by anyone with his little pistol. Based.
I think we're done.
We're just not answering what I'm saying.
I think I've already answered that. But just to go back to the meat of that, I think you don't realize that actually people like me who have
That's literally the third season of Fauda. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it totally is. It's four good men. 4 good men and some sharpened chopsticks against the Hamas military in Gaza. Some sharpened toothbrushes with elastic bands. Barabbas Dantiok, thanks for the 5 USDs. Thanks very much. I rate 4 Michelin stars. Wow, thank you.
Voice and right and much more. Do think about that all the time. It's a profound concern and responsibility.
I agree with that.
Right. And I don't worry all the time and make sure I intervene into the debate very carefully at times when I think some people have picked up something that I've been saying and are going to go wrong with it. That scares the hell out of me. And I do it regularly.
Yeah,
I do it because I have to.
Yeah, listen, so that's a point of agreement too. But you don't stop believing that policy for it, and you won't stop bringing that up.
But you do say on occasion, I mean, most obvious one on that, if there is something where something really fetid happens, something really terrible, and there's a bunch of people that decide to riot or commit violence or something like that, I know that I have to, as a duty, say, absolutely, this is to be condemned. If it is people trying to pretend that all Muslims this or all that, absolutely, I intervene to stop that.
Yes.
I think that this is one of the responsibilities.
Please, sir, it is not all Muslims. It is merely most of them. Please do not stain my name by assuming it is all Muslims.
It comes with putting out ideas in the public square. Yeah. And I think that none of us are blame-free, but all of us have some kind of responsibility to know that what we put out there is very carefully watched, very carefully followed, and that we have to tread well.
Well, okay, so I agree with that, but when you say you intervene, what exactly do you mean by that? You mean you voice opposition to it. You say, hey, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that like we have to have a sane immigration policy that's good for our country.
Or make sure I say which politician I think can deal with it decently and which ones will not. I mean, I've made plenty of enemies on the European right by saying who I think is bad, who will not do this well. But yeah. I just put it out there. I think I say it as a point of caution.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't disagree with that, and I've certainly done the same thing and said that, like, I don't know, obviously, I don't like Jew hatred on Twitter.
You promote a fucking Holocaust denier. Shut the fuck up. Rope. Fuck you.
And I don't like people jumping to wild conspiracies that they don't have nearly enough evidence to, actually back up, which I've seen quite a bit of. That being said, I also think there's a whole lot of real conspiracies, and I'm not going to stop talking about those just because some
Candace Owens was glazing him after this appearance as well, by the way. Guy who cares about not fomenting anti-Semitism and not enabling that shit. Yeah, Dave Smith, this guy just eat glass. I don't know. He makes me so angry.
On Twitter might take in that direction.
Well, as the great Michael Malice said, As you quoted, one red pill, not the whole bottle.
I've been trying to limit people to one red pill. One red pill a year.
Probably.
Is all you
So
need.
a lot of people, they take one of those things and they just get hungry.
Sort of like boosters.
Like boosters.
Well, it ends up. Yeah, exactly. You take none of those. No, you're supposed to take one red pill.
By the way,
Not supposed to
what's
take
the
any
one? What's the one in front of you?
Which one?
That one there.
This?
That one. Yeah.
It's nicotine.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's.
Hello, Lonerbox. How's life going? Just rejoined your channel after like a year of not watching. Oh. Yeah, it's all good, you know? Banging. Some changes. Big deal, you know? Looking up.
The chewing ones.
It's like a pouch.
Chris Williamson showed me yesterday this one that he said weightlifters are using in Austin. It's like a powder or something.
Weightlifters.
Yeah.
A nicotine powder?
No, it's not nicotine. It's something like it.
Creatine?
No, it's like it's to sniff.
Oh, no. That's smelling salts. We do
Smelling
that
salt. That's right.
for a
Smelling
goof.
salts.
For silly. We do that to be silly.
I hadn't heard of that since
They're
like
horrible.
19th century women who thought they had the vapors, and he said these are smelling salts.
Well, they used to use it for boxers when they got knocked out
Is that
to wake them up.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. Does it work?
Well, it works for weightlifters. You sniff it before you lift incredible amounts of weight. Allegedly, powerlifters use them. That's literally why they sell it. It just jolts your entire central nervous system because it's so horrific. You want to smell?
No.
This is, by the way, a little insight into the comedy community. The deal is that Joe will help advance the careers of comedians, unlike anybody since Johnny Carson. But then the cost is you do have to sniff smelling salts. We all have to do that. It's a Faustian bargain of sorts, but it is what it is.
Do you have a heart out, Douglas?
Kind of. I got to get to DC.
Okay.
One of my least favorite cities in the country, but
Another area of agreement. There we go.
What comment?
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate it. It was very, very good. I enjoyed it very much, and thank you, Dave.
I do. Of course, thank you to you, John. Thank you, Douglas, very much. I do appreciate that. While we do fundamentally disagree on a lot of this stuff, I do admire that you will have these
I'll
conversations.
show everyone the book here. It's Jesus Christ. What did on myself,
Christ.
luckily. On democracies and death cults, Israel and the future of civilization, Douglas Murray. Did you do the audiobook?
I did do the
yourself?
audiobook.
Thank
You can hear these mellifluous tones.
Yes, love
I'll
it.
sign this
It would be
off
a
for you.
tragedy if anybody else did it. Thank you
trust
very
you.
much. Yes. All right. Beautiful. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.
Brilliant. 4 stars. Bullshit show. More like 3 stars. More like 2, really. 1.